let's kick this off and ask the harder questions, and hopefully we can debate. And I will start with, the question that everybody now is asking: what governance structure are required to align the interest of public and private stakeholders across regions? And how should it be institutional home, secretariated, steering group, multilateral form be designed? So how is it going to be? And I will start with you, Roy.
I've got no idea. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, the Danube Institute, and Signap Group. Great to be here. This is a tricky one, for sure. You have a lot of... what's interesting about IMEC is that it's not happening in a vacuum, right? You've got a variety of different geopolitical trade corridors and just links happening in different parts of the world. This is different because it's not, we're comparing BRI to IMEC. It's not a BRI. This is not just about a rail link or a port link. It's multilateral with countries which are quite different. They're different from the regulations they have, the types of governance that they have internally, their financial structures, their decision-making capability. It's different because it's not just about logistics. It's also about the connection of data, the connection of energy, and so on and so forth. And what we're also understanding from the previous panels is that there are some conversations happening. So there's a steering committee that is happening between India and the UAE. But to get the other countries involved, there has to be a few things which take place. And if you look at other projects out there, some of them are indeed multilateral, and some of them are just managed by contractual obligations. Here, we're probably going to be looking at something which is a mix, and starts off with being an entity, a legal entity that is governed with senior leaders, minister level or something at that level, who are owning with a share in this entity, whatever that is. You need to have a person who is the authority. That authority can move from one person to the next every couple of years. But there's got to be a general secretary who is the person who is calling an invitation for these for the other representatives, and under which you would have. I'm thinking about 4 committees, maybe more, but at least 4 committees, and each committee is going to have needs to also have somebody who's from the private sector, and the committees are going to have to look at regulation. How do you make sure that there is smooth border control passage and regulatory frameworks that allow for passage of goods, tariffs for energy. If the gauges are going to be different width, how do you have the ability to minimize the slowness of that? So that's a regulation committee. You need to have a financial committee, which is going to look at what is a public good. What is going to go for the private sector? We talked a lot about public-private partnerships. That committee is going to have to look at those things. You're going to have a situation where there are an authority looking at the finances. If this is an entity, it's going to need to have some budgets, and it has to be managed. And then there's probably going to need to be a fund that allows for the investment into public goods, which is shared across different jurisdictions. You need to have a dispute resolutions capability. So multi-countries are going to have arguments about a variety of things. So kind of a dispute resolution mechanism is going to be essential. And obviously, given the fund region that this is all sitting in, a security committee. Someone is going to be looking at the physical security of all the assets and also the digital security. So a cybersecurity team that's able to protect this from any intervention. One recommendation I would have, and I've seen this work in projects I've been dealing with, and this is not because I'm a consultant or because you're a consultant, but because there's so much volatility and governments tend to disagree on many things. It is a recommendation that a private company actually does a lot of the project management of all of this. It is there to make sure that whatever happens, it continues beyond any kind of political challenge, that there's clear oversight, that there's clear monitoring, that there's also the ability to prioritize what projects happen, when, what's going to drive revenue when, what incentives private companies need. And so that's another recommendation. Let me pause and let others.
Yeah, this is very thoughtful, Roy. And from this, I really want to take the question to Danielle from American perspective and a think tank and a thought leader like you. Who will be leading IMEC? Like, let's address the elephant in the room.
Okay, thanks for having me. Let me first say that there are any number of different models you could have for the governance of this, and then I'll come to who should be leading. The Belt and Road is clearly a very top-down model. China basically says we're going to do this, and then you have a series of countries that are signatories to it, and then China kind of presents this is what we're going to be doing, and there are pluses and minuses to that model, but that is one model. I certainly think what Roy was talking about, having some kind of networked approach or some sort of networked model is something along the lines of what you're ultimately going to need, or some kind of a steering group. I do think, frankly, I think that the Trump administration has indicated some interest in IMEC. The Biden administration, were present at the creation and supported IMEC. But I think it would be smart if some of the middle powers championed this and took this on. That someone's going to have to take on the transaction costs of making this happen. I think I want to give credit to the Danube Institute and our hosts, along with Signal, for putting this conference together, because these sorts of things take a lot of work and require a lot of transaction costs. So I would suggest that there are several things that need to happen and I think Ambassador Carlos Sanz was talking about, we need to create a timetable. I would suggest it's even more prosaic than that. There are several things we need to do. We need to catalog the economic opportunities if this is actually done. Like, specifically speak to, okay, if we do this, these are the contracts that will actually happen if this actually happens. Then we need to make an efficiency case. If we build this, instead of 10 days on a boat, it'll take 7 days on a boat. We need to make those very prosaic and specific. We need to make a very specific cataloging exercise. Third, it would be quite useful to have some sort of tracking of the progress of this. I think it's fabulous that this is a compelling vision. We need to now be able to kind of track, okay, well, this year, this part of the road's going to be built, or this year, this is. Then fourth, we're going to need some way of having some ability for people to take advantage of, well, there's going to be a bid on the rebuilding of X port, or there's going to be a bid on delivering the construction of this railway. There's going to need to be a lot of, so some of this could be through some sort of extra governmental effort. I'm in the think tank business, so like the consulting business, where I'm always looking for self-employment opportunities. But it seems to me that a network of capable think tanks who are invested in this could perfectly well capture and track this. My institution, for a long period of time, tracked kind of the construction of the Belt and Road Initiative. I think that's great, except we were sort of observers, watching it. I'd rather have some people who've got some stake in the business in terms of saying, we're building this and let's bring people together to accelerate it, as opposed to saying, look at what China's doing. I'd like to have something that with a little bit more stake in it. I do think that, having said all this, I want to go back to the point that I think this is something that Italy could own. So the right think tank in Italy could be a part of this, given the interests of the Trieste government, the Trieste local government, but also that President Maloney has expressed significant interest in this. I think the Danube Institute, this could be a homework assignment for the Danube Institute. You certainly need an Israeli partner for this, and Signal's obviously an obvious partner. So it seems to me that you could have a network of, I would start with a network of think tanks to capture the economic opportunity, a timetable, tracking progress, convening. And yes, I think you need some sort of higher level than perhaps steering committee, but you need something that's in the private space. Perhaps maybe it's not a company, maybe it's a network of institutes that do this. But it seems to me that, okay, and then where's the United States in this? I think the United States will have a sustained interest in this to the extent that the economic opportunity is made clear. And the economic opportunity for the United States, for American jobs and American workers, has to be made explicitly clear. And so I think that's what's going to sustain U.S. interest in IMEC. This is an out of the United States project. We care about the security of Israel. We care about the stability in Europe. We care about our partners in India and in the Middle East. But to sustain our interest, we're going to have to make clear the economic opportunity for the United States.
Thank you very much. This is also another thoughtful idea on the table, which is a great segue to my question to you, Mr. Nardini, is how can long-term financing be secured and sustained, particularly in fragile or high-risk zones?
Thank you, everyone. Well, first of all, good afternoon, and many thanks to the Danube Institute for the invitation. And yes, briefly before coming to your question, Italy is committed to IMEC, signed a memorandum, and just recently appointed an envoy to the IMEC, following a little bit the lead of France that did the same last year. In regard to Trieste, we are, as the colleague of mine this morning anticipated, the private operator Francesco Parisi, the port system, the logistics system of Trieste and Monfalcone is already serving Central and Eastern European countries, especially via railway. So we have roughly around 10,000 freight trains per annum transporting goods from and to Eastern and Central European countries. But despite the global uncertainties, we keep on investing in increasing capacity, both in terms of vessel acceptance and in terms of railway expansions. I'm speaking of 1 billion euros of private and public funds that are underway, under implementation as we speak. And just to state an example, our capacity of trains is roughly 14,000 trains per year. Thanks to these projects, or infrastructural projects, we are planning to almost double this capacity by year 2030. So we are doing our part in making possible to accept increasing flows of goods also from this huge opportunity, which is IMEC. But I cannot, of course, speak for the Italian government, although I am employed in a public agency which is state-owned, the Port Network Authority of Trieste and Monfalcone ports. I'm sure, and this is a fact, that the Italian foreign minister called for a summit in Trieste this year, in autumn this year, of the foreign ministers of all the IMEC signatories countries. So we will see in few months what are exactly the practical steps that this huge project is taking place. I have my own ideas, and which are pretty much in line with yours, if I may, in the sense that I see as necessary to create some sort of architecture. So we need some layers and to strike some balance in between coordination and autonomy, because we have very different legal statuses and political statuses in IMEC. But it is also necessary to expect some form of secretariat that carry on the daily basis, daily grievances and issues that a project like this is expected to have. And the only add-on that I might adjust to this framework, a very sketchy framework, is probably also to expect some regional hubs. So to create a European hub of IMEC, a Middle Eastern hub of IMEC, an India hub of IMEC, just to also engage the local communities, because this is a project that has to take on board also in terms of jobs and acceptance from the local communities, the projects that have been carried out. So.
This is exactly very, I mean, this is something we've been discussing, and thank you, gentlemen, but this is now, I would say, we've been discussing the theoretical of the structure and how it's going to be, but may allow me to address the elephant in the room a little bit further and scratch the surface. It might sound like who's first, the egg or chicken, but a lot of other panelists, they discuss like we shouldn't wait. We should start. We don't know when to start, especially like when it comes to Israel, Gaza, the unclear peace between Saudi and Israel, and other regional rivalry. So, Roy, and this is also a question for the panel, how can we put this forward while all these like political, geopolitics risks are taking place, and be bold about it and just make it happen?
Thanks for that question. It reminds me of a project I was involved in regarding EastMed Energy, and every so often when we wanted to launch it, something came up. A new government came in, the politics weren't right, the COVID hit, Ukraine war. Obviously, every time something happens, you can't move forward. That's called analysis paralysis. You're always thinking about how do you create or plan or do something, and so you can't move forward. So, as a headline for this, whoever's writing a press release after this, analysis paralysis. Don't let analysis paralysis get in the way. And I think maybe the Israeli government representative Ophir was talking about this before. There's so much that can be done now that doesn't require the building of a train line or a terminal, that there's no point in waiting. There is, we were mentioning feasibility studies. A feasibility study is a big piece of work, right? I was involved with the Red Sea, Dead Sea feasibility in 2007, 2008. $7 million, 5 different companies, World Bank funded, and it didn't go anywhere, right? But it's a lot of work to look at anything, tenders. There's things you can just do, and whether it's what is it going to cost to do project A, and how do you factor for different currencies and fluctuations, and every bank that's going to look at putting money against the project is going to look at risk. Sorry.
But maybe it's an opportunity when there is this chaos. For instance, when if I like how you do things theoretically, but I'll drag you to the practicality of things. Is like, let's take Gaza, right? Yeah. There's an opportunity for Gaza port could be part of the IMEC. Isn't that a plausible?
We were talking about before. An idea of a Gaza port is something that has been around for a while. Arguably the Americans during the war were trying to set up some kind of a little port. The Americans
Nardini is not liking it. There's a competition already.
But so before competition, there are a variety of options.
I had a memory when I was working in the port of Venice. We had a delegation from Israel, and they were planning. This was early 2000. They were planning to build a port for the Palestinians. So this was an issue back then, 25 years ago.
So I don't know if this is another elephant in the room. There's no reason why you wouldn't take this opportunity to look at IMEC and say, IMEC could be also part of rebuilding or reinvesting. It's a job creation. It's something that I think would make a lot of the parties in the region quite happy to think about it that way. But I don't know if that is still I think that is still in the theoretical regardless.
Maybe Daniel can shed some light on other Turkey, Iran. How can we do this in a way that actually started?
I would avoid the elephants in the room. So I would actually work around the elephants in the room. I think if we're going to wait to kind of solve the elephants in the room, this will never get done. So I think about other projects like the Trans-Caspian corridor, where if you look at Central Asia, they're excited about building a big project through Iran. I just don't think the West, the Asian Development Bank or others are going to be super excited about financing a project in Iran. Or let's build a project through Afghanistan and it's going to be 4 times the amount of cost and 4 times the amount of time. Or let's build a railroad through Xinjiang and see how many people get excited about that. So the Trans-Caspian corridor is sort of the, or let's go through Russia. Right now there's all sorts of sanctions. Maybe in a week there won't be, but probably will be. So my point is the Trans-Caspian corridor is an answer to a problem, which is, trade is passing through Central Asia like a balloon. In theory, IMEC is a solution to a potential problem of that there could be additional flows. My view is, whether it's Iran or I do think there's going to be some speed bumps, which is whether we get peace in our time between Saudi Arabia and Israel this year or 5 years from now. This is probably a 20-year project to do all of these things. So and I wouldn't spend too much time about figuring out whether we're going to get peace in our time. I mean, I hear you that there are potentially, I'm going to call it ancillary opportunities, such as like a port in Gaza or not, or what happens. And so, with that, but I would just say that we should focus on the achievable now. I think there's a series of very boring but important exercises that would need to happen to make IMEC for real. And I would go back to sort of, of course, this is where I'm sitting, right? So let's come up with a timetable. Let's come up with making the case for why this is worth the effort. Let's come up with the actual advantages are beyond the idea of like we're just all in a room and wouldn't this be a nice thing. But instead of 10 days on a boat, it's going to be 8 days on a boat, and this is $1 trillion opportunity. And then say, okay, and if we figured out Gaza, it'd be $1.1 trillion, and if we solved Iran, that'd be $1.2 trillion, and if we got peace in our time between Israel and Saudi Arabia, it'd be $2 trillion, right, or something. So my point is, I hear you that there are a series of elephants in the room. I think we should take achievable steps now, and then be opportunistic as the situation on the ground changes, and we should take it from there.
Thank you very much. And I think that this is where achievable, or I would say actionable steps are. My next question to you, Nerdy, is if I may say that, is that when you say actionable, or when we say, I agree with Danielle, how, can you convince, since you're in the kind of like public-private sphere, how can you convince stakeholders, investors, to come and put money, whether it's government or institutions, to invest, right? So they want these kind of actionable, steps, but there are things that are out of control. So what would be the recipe to go do these pitches?
Well, the case study of Trieste is a lucky one then, because we managed to take on board private investors pretty easily. And Francesco Parisi could also testify that, because we had on board in recent years Port of Hamburg, for instance, or the Hungarian government that chose a location in the port of Trieste to build a new terminal. And the Italian government put money in the mix, so it's a public-private partnership. Or these are private partnership projects. The appeal, of course, is given by the geographical position of Trieste, which, as we said, is serving perfectly Central and Eastern European countries throughout this existing railway network that just needed minor investment or selective investments to be revamped or empowered. And also thanks to legislative measures taken at EU level, like the liberalization process that opened up the market to private undertakings in railway traction sector. And all these are case scenarios for IMEC, because the Trans-European Transport Network is a good example of, for instance, cross-border interoperability of different railway systems. Of course, the cons of this might be an excessive legislation attitude or a regulation attitude, like sometimes the European Union has been called against or about, and this is something not to do or to repeat. But there are some very good examples.
Thank you very much. Also, something very interesting Dr. Ibtisam mentioned is the track 2, right? And Question also for you, gentlemen, on the panel. If we want to bring track 2 with the existing potential states and government or non-government entities, one, what are the guarantees that we can provide or can be presented for track 2 for the members to like start discussing? Second, I think, Roy, you have ideas of like who else should be included in the IMEC.
I'll start with the second. I think conversations I've had with people in this room who have good suggestions. There's something very manageable about the actors we have now and the geography that we have now, and that's probably important to keep it as such. But we can't ignore the fact that there are other developments happening globally, one region to the left, one region to the right, which are as important for the Middle East, as important for Europe, and as we think about IMEC, we need to take these under consideration. Obviously, Africa is a big thing, and I don't think we've heard of Africa today yet. A lot of links in Africa, both in Western Africa, so I think Angola, DRC, Zambia, a way to get some of the critical minerals out going west, Kenya, Ethiopia, South Sudan, an entry point. We're designing, this map. I'm not suggesting that we add another geography could complicate things further, but not forgetting that there are going to be opportunities in other region. And just to think about, you're asking about financial feasibility, you're asking about how do you make this work. I think today is a major CEO forum in Cote d'Ivoire, in Abidjan. All of the shipping companies are there. All of the logistics companies are there. They're all looking to see what the opportunities are there. You can't build a complete 20-year project without taking into consideration what's happening in other parts of the world, certainly not in Africa right now. So that's the thing. I hope that answers.
Yes, that answers. But also, the second one, if you may address it, the guarantees, right? Like they say in Arabic that capitals are capital money, or like the owners of capitals are cowards. Ras al-Mal Jaban. So what kind of guarantees you can?
I'm not a banker, but I would imagine there are people in this room with banking or financial experience, and you know that the first, I don't know how many pages of any kind of projects are all the risks that come with the project, and you have to go through all the different risks, and there's so many different. Every risk has to be mitigated against in order to secure some kind of funding. And so that's where the responsibility of governments to help private sector overcome the risk, whether it's a regulatory risk, you need to have a situation where somebody can build on the land with the communities on the land being treated fairly. It could be a currency fluctuation risk. If you're building a project in Jordan and financing it in euros, and then the prices go up or go down, there's going to be a risk. And it's for government, and that's why I suggested these frameworks, because you need to have technical expertise and committees working on identifying all of these. To your point, mapping out not just the project but also the issues, and working through what do the governments need to do to address these things. What are the contracts, and how creative can you be with these contracts? What are the new financial vehicles you're going to create? Are there any green bonds that are going to be issued if there's an environmental project, or an IMEC bond to allow for maybe countries which are not part to finance, and for financial institutions in Wall Street or in London to come in and participate in this? Are there all kinds of projects which, let's face it, and no one's going to make money from building a train line. They're going to make money if they're taking money from goods going back and forth. But the actual project that you build, that's a public good. So governments will probably have to put their hands in their pocket and do that, at least for the beginning. And then if a company comes in and doesn't get revenue back in 5 years or in 7 years, the feasibility study would show it, they need to know that they can come in and have some kind of guarantee for making money. So governments will have to say, we will commit to, and I'm sure the ports know how this works better than I do, we need to commit to a certain level of revenue no matter what, even if 1 year, certainly the beginning, you're not making enough money, and then give enough credit for companies to make sure that they're incentivized.
Thank you. Daniel, your thought?
Yeah, so I wanted to comment on a couple things. I thought Sergio's comment about, I would like about the small tweaks. I'm going to call it like the low-hanging fruit. There seems to me there's probably a series of, if we could identify what are the easy wins and push on those, that would be a useful thing. What are some actionable, useful, small tweaks we could make, I think is a useful thing. The second thing, when I think about a track 2, I actually would suggest the track 2 ought to be a series of business conferences. I would, instead of having former undersecretary of something come or the former brigadier general X come, which, okay, you can do that, and I think there's potentially some value to that. Far more interesting as a track 2 would be to say we're going to have a business conference. We're going to have a conversation on IMEC rail. We're going to have a business conference on IMEC ports. We're going to have a business conference on IMEC gas ducts. We're going to have an IMEC conference on the digital aspect of IMEC. And so we would bring people along those lines. Where I do think, if you think about guarantees and you think about, there's the alphabet soup of development finance institutions here in Europe. The Hungarians have one called Corvinus. It's 100% owned by the Hungarian Development Bank. That would be those sorts of institutions provide financial guarantees. They do project finance. There's a whole alphabet soup of them. Italy has one. I forget what it's called. There's also the network of export credit agencies. All these, if you want to export, you want to export Caterpillar earth movers, or you want to export a power generation from Westinghouse or an SMR model, you're going to use export credit agencies. So you have export credit agencies. Then I look at this map, and I think the Asian Development Bank has an interest in this, should. The EBRD, which is less known but is sort of the development bank of this post-Soviet space, should have an interest in this. The European Investment Bank, which is in Luxembourg and has got a lot of money, should have an interest in this. The World Bank, IFC, to the extent that the shareholders ride herd on it and tell them to focus on it, they should have an interest in this. So it seems to me there's sort of a network of DFIs, ECAs, regional development banks, that would have interest in this exercise. And then I think there's probably a series of sovereign wealth funds. I don't know if UAE has a sovereign wealth fund. I'm betting they do. The Kuwaitis certainly do. Norway's got one.
Saudi.
Right, the Saudis have one last time I checked, right? So my point is there's probably lots of pools of capital for this. So again, I would make the case, catalog what's needed, identify short-term needs, think about bringing in business as a stakeholder, as having a political stake in this, as well as having an economic stake in this. Make the economic argument and have the economic analysis as why this is worth it, and make the logistics case about if we do this, we're going to save so many days in transit. So feasibility studies matter, financial guarantees or access to project finance. There's plenty of money, I would think, for something like this. So I go back to what I said earlier. I think middle powers have a role to play here. If they're invested in the success of this, there's, in my view, this is something that a small handful of middle powers ought to lead, because I'm sure the United States will have a stake in this, but I think if we're going to wait for the Trump administration to take the lead on this, maybe they will, maybe they won't. I'm sure they will participate in this, and they will make available resources and put some political will behind it. But I think we shouldn't wait for that moment. We should instead, if this is to happen, this is an opportunity for a handful of middle powers to take the lead on it, and then invite the United States to join as a very active participant in some kind of an important role.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Mr. Nardini, building on what Troy and Daniel said, from Italy perspective, from a port perspective, is there anything that should be taken in a special way in terms of guarantees or new players in the game? Can you shed some light on that, please?
Well, I believe that most all of it has been already anticipated by my distinguished colleagues, in the sense that calling for these innovative events, call for these business forums, is the ideal opportunity to have the people in the same space at the same time and presented with a list of needs, pull out and find out solutions and resources, because institutions are out there, capital are out there. And I only wanted to add probably the Global Gateway Initiative of the European Union could be another
Good idea.
because it was born to, in a sense, to reply very lately to the BRI and was born under, let's say, very old project design and concepts. So IMEC came after the Global Gateway. So I believe that would be another very good, let's say, way to finance this huge project.
Daniel, you seem to have some comment on that.
Yeah, people have been saying we shouldn't underestimate the resources and influence of the European Union. They have a lot of money, and the EU, the European Union has any number of different agencies and initiatives like Global Gateway that could be this. So I think this is something. If this is important to, I think this is something Italy could take a leadership role in. But I also think Italy and perhaps Hungary leading the European Union could push the EU to take some sort of absolutely, whether it's the European Investment Bank, Global Gateway, some of the European Union aid agencies. These are all ways to unlock resources.
Roy?
Yeah, maybe I'll just, not to pour any cold water, I don't want to pour cold water, but just to maybe highlight the growing pressures certainly in Europe when it comes to the needs of finance for pretty major things, starting with defense. I mean, the U.S. is pulling out of Europe, and so when governments are looking at what they need to spend money on, they're spending money on some infrastructure projects, whether it's in the Middle Corridor, whether it's in Africa. There's no reason why they wouldn't spend money on IMEC. It's in their primary interest, but the pressures are mounting. And whether it's on manufacturing in Europe or the defense industry and so on. So we just need to make sure that this is spread across amongst the countries involved. Certainly the UAE's got some significant funding from its sovereign wealth funds. Saudi does, but Saudi I know is spending a lot of money, I'm told, on all kinds of other projects in different parts of the country. Countries such as Israel's got massive amounts of money, but they're all stuck within private financial firms. It's $1.7 trillion sitting in Israeli private insurance firms. How do you create regulation to unlock that? Do the same in Europe. So I think there's also some thinking about where capital exists in the DFIs, IFIs, all the entities that exist, and what can be done to create tweaks too. I like that word. Tweaks in certain parts.
It's a think tank.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like think tanks. To unleash some opportunities as well.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I would like to open the floor also for the audience. I'm sure that some of you might have questions. So if you would like to ask our panelists. Apparently not. So I'll actually ask you the question again, which is...
You guys run up there.
Oh, okay.
I was going to say we were so compelling.
You covered all bases. You covered all the...
Right. Sign the check, exactly.
Daniel, I think you made a great summary talking about 4 or 5 or 6 different ways of being practical, focusing on rail, focusing on different types of things. If you could expand on that a bit, because I think so far we've had a lot of theoretical things, but if that, and I looked at some of your background, by the way, it looks like you are really a practical guy with your USAID reforms, etc. So if you could lead us how that could be done in a practical way, I believe that could be the way forward for IMEC. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, if I may. Okay, so a couple of things. So I would have I think a small group of institutions could quickly map out, okay, where are the bottlenecks, and I would work around the big ones like Saudi and Gaza, but let me call the engineering bottlenecks. I would start with that. Then I would have a second track again on, okay, if you had all of those, resolve these, how much transit could go through there, and what kind of opportunities, whether it's for Africa, I think it's an interesting idea, or you know, in terms of where there's spin-off effects of that. Then I would begin to bring in various stakeholders to become more invested in this. So in my mind, clearly there's an interest of ports. Clearly there's an interest of shippers. Clearly there's an interest of construction firms. Clearly there should be an interest of the digital economy. Clearly there's an interest, there should be, whether it's the agribusiness shippers of the world, we talked about dry goods, the dry goods players should have an interest in this. And I would begin to build I would have the intellectual framework, right, of course, I'm at a think tank, right, so I think we got to do another study and et cetera, but I do think bringing in, and this is the sort of roles of companies like APCO and others, is to bring in companies to become invested in this, both in terms of on a practical standpoint, but also to provide political muscle to kind of make this actually come about. So I think, and then look, we can't underestimate whether it's the sovereign wealth funds, these regional development banks, or the European Union have gobs of money. That's also another think tank term. And we should, you know, it's true there are constraints. They're being asked to do different things. But I'd like to believe I also think if you could provide certain kinds of financial guarantees or pay for some of the feasibility studies which could come out of government funding, that a lot of this could be financed through private capital. It doesn't have to be through public capital, but there could be roles for DFIs and ECAs and again, lots of alphabet soup acronyms. But basically there's this network of acronyms that can be deployed in a practical way to make this real. So I think those would be sort of the specific practical things that one would do to make this happen. Again, I wouldn't wait. Let's not wait for Superman or Superwoman to show up and kind of make this happen. I think we're looking at the folks who are going to make this happen. And so my view is we should take some further initiatives. I'm really happy that the Danube Institute and Signal have convened this, because I don't know who else is going to do it. So, I mean, I think I go to a lot of conferences, and this is the first time I've been to a serious IMEC conference. Now, maybe I'm just not on the circuit, but I think this is unique, and I think it's really an excellent conference and an excellent opportunity for us to think about, okay, let's actually operationalize it. And again, I go back to Israel, Hungary, Italy, UAE. In my view, that's the core group that ought to take this on, and then people will follow. That's my practical suggestion.
Oh, sir. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you. Quick question. I would like to understand from your perspective an example of a very positive PPP that you could talk about. So that gives us an idea for the listeners to understand what you consider to be a positive outcome of a PPP situation.
Roy, do you want to take this?
I mean, I can give. I think, you know, if we're talking about Port of Trieste as an example, I think most ports, but most major infrastructure projects, which have a strong revenue model, the government has to give the authority for somebody to come in and build it, and then it has to give somebody the license to operate it. Think about energy assets, East Med gas assets. You know, the gas fields are owned by the economic waters of a certain government. The private company takes the risk in drilling and getting the gas, but the government has to give some kind of framework, some of a regulatory framework to do that. In some instances, the government has to actually invest a bit, do a feasibility study, so do a geological study, provide security for the asset, but provide enough for the company, whatever the drilling company, the O&G company, to raise the capital needed to actually do the work at the risk of losing money if it doesn't commercialize. So, you know, when it's successful, it's successful. Sometimes not successful because, I mean, China, I think, has enough examples of projects that it thought would be public-private partnerships because it had companies, Chinese companies, and it had the government backing locally. but it didn't come together. Many of them failed. But in these kinds of projects, you always need some kind of a joint effort for it to be successful. Governments would give a certain lease, 20 years lease, 30 years lease for somebody to operate it. So if we're talking about a rail line, to incentivize a company to come in, say, look, if you invest and you build the track and give all the locomotives and the monitoring and the insurance, we'll let you exclusivity for 20 years to operate it and collect the revenue back. And that's how that comes together.
Of course. Of course. You don't have to ask.
What kind of entity do the big shipping companies and port companies need to hear from to get them to be willing to take this seriously? Because, IMEC is right now, there are bits and pieces, as we know, but it's not, quote unquote, happening. So who needs to talk to these companies, which I really see are, as you said, the muscle? They bring political muscle, economic muscle, everything. And they know how to get things done. So who needs to talk to them to tell them this is worth your while?
Well, again, as far as Trieste experience goes, shipping companies, especially in the container sector, the giants, we're talking first 5 operators, are also profoundly vertically integrating along the logistics chain since probably beginning this millennia. So they know perfectly where the spice is, and they move, and they're first movers in many respects. So in this respect, they don't need to be told that there's an opportunity. For instance, in Trieste, there's a pier number 7, the only container terminal up to now that is managed by MSC. So it's player number 1, the Swiss-based but Italian is managed, and operator number 1 worldwide in the container business, and is also owning rail traction companies, and it's also investing in logistics, in inland logistics, and so on. And in pier number 7 is one of the example of enlargement project, also in this case with public funds for the modernization of the pier. But for instance, pier number 8, which is a second container terminal that is going to be built, is a PPP. Now the gentleman left the room, but it's an example of successful PPP, private and public partnership in the maritime business. And in this case, the operator is Hamburg Hafen, which is Port of Hamburg, and a local, very important freight forwarder agent of Trieste. So this.
I mean, I almost think you're going to need the business coalition for IMEC. So instead, when I think of a track 2, I think the track 2 is a business coalition, is a business meeting. Maybe it's organized by a think tank. We've done that in my current, where I currently work. But I think, lots of institutions could do that. And I think there's you could also even create some sort of almost like a multi-country lobby network. You can call it that, but let's call it an advocacy network that you would create that would almost create like a bespoke network of stakeholders that are invested in the success of IMEC in the different parts of the business community.
Roy?
Maybe a couple of things. Carice, to your question, I can tell you from a few conversations I've had, some of which you know about, some of these companies are, as was said, they know about this, they're keen on this, they want to be part of it, they will be part of it, they'll be the first movers. They don't want to choose one corridor over another. They don't want to be in a and an IMEC over a BRI or at a
Trans-Caspian.
they want to trade, and so for them to be advocating on this and not the other doesn't serve their business interests. So, but they'll be there, and they're there in all ports and all positions. So I wouldn't be concerned about that. The other, I think, group that has to be a very big part of this, we've spoken about this as well, is the financial industry, both the multinational institutions, but also the private funds, the BlackRocks of the world. They need to think that this is worth their while to put some to support the private businesses, because they'll be coming to them to raise capital.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. With that, I would like to wrap up a very insightful panel and discussion with thought leaders from Europe, United States, and Israel, at least. Thank you very much, and I'll give you back 5 minutes before the next panel. Thank you.
So we are not going to have a coffee break right now. We are going to start our next panel without a break in a minute or two.
Most of your crowd.
I know, it seems that most people only stayed for the food. We had
Always stay for the first half. So if you want to pack something, pack in the first half. After lunch,
Thank you. What a pleasure. Thank you.
Can you give me some remarks now? You're speaking?
in the last session.
Last session?
You guys have
Okay, good.
I was just moderating.
Sir?
It's a good idea. It's a good idea. Where are you doing that? Looking for some places. Are you here?
oriented approach. And I
Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start our final two sessions, which are going to be twin sessions, expanding IMEC stakes and benefits, connecting the Global South and the Indo-Pacific. The first part is going to be focused on the Indo-Pacific, followed by a coffee break, and then after the coffee break, we are going to have our final panel about focusing on the Global South. So the first panel is going to be moderated by Tommy Steiner, Policy Director of the Signap Group.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you, Christoph. And I want to take this opportunity because I think it's a mixture of my origins to be a bit out of line. But first of all, I think we owe our gratitude to Christoph for bringing us together today. Yes. And he's been a marvelous partner to work with. Coping with us is not easy. And we are very grateful to him, to his colleagues, to Melinda, if she's here somewhere and she's hearing me or will hear me. Later on, other members of the team from the Danube Institute, Julia from our team who's here also. And I think that, well, we haven't ended this first day, but I think insofar this effort has paid off. And now I want to move to our session, which, as Christoph mentioned, is a twin session, one of two. And it is about essentially expanding IMEC. Now, I have to admit that after listening to the last two sessions, the one on the economic rationale and then but also on the governance, on the intricacy, which by the way we knew, but when we heard how intricate the effort will be ahead, that we are essentially going down an uncharted path. And this is really a very singular undertaking in that sense. Then the question is, all right, so if it's so complicated, why do we want to even make it more complicated by considering its expansion? Now, there is a rationale for it. I think Carice mentioned it earlier this morning, and it was echoed in the geopolitical session, the issue of Egypt. There's a question of Indo-Pacific. I believe that Kosh will actually bring in another region to the discussion. I'm not inventing this, right?
You point me and I will dance.
I'm not that powerful. I'm not that powerful. But this is a question because, you know, people think, all right, let's add in Indo-Pacific. Why not? But that question still requires some consideration, how to do it, who to do it with, because Indo-Pacific is large, rather large. So the question is it, will it not dilute IMEC? Will it not impact negatively? In other words, what are the risks and opportunities here? Now, we've brought together 3 experts from different...
Well, 2 experts say Kosh.
That's right. I'm not an expert of anything.
I used to call myself a jack of all trades. Myself, master of none. But the thing is, we have brought 3 experts together to weigh in on this question of Indo-Pacific, of expanding, and by the way, you know, one of my first questions to Dr. Lee will be, are you really interested in IMEC? Because, you know, that's a question. So let me introduce them briefly. Koos Alga is a senior visiting fellow at the Kratz Institute for Diplomacy, and he is the president of Free and Open Indo-Pacific Forum. He is also affiliated with the Atlantic Council. In previous incarnations in the administration, he was affiliated with thinking, I would say thinking, or being a think leader, a thought leader, in developing new concepts on connectivity, on broader engagement. So it will be interesting to have him bring in his experience to this mix. Dr. Lee Han is with the Vietnamese Diplomatic Academy in Hanoi. She's an expert in international affairs. She is also has a strong French background. So again, that will be an interesting addition to this mix. And Mr. Thomas Park, based in Manama, if I'm not mistaken, he's a businessman of American Korean background, capital business and finance. So again, this is a very eclectic group of people. So I hope that the input will be there. So let me take it first to you, Kosh. Is expanding IMEC at this stage, talking about the expansion of IMEC, is it the right thing to do when we don't even know how we're going to pick it up from the ground? Or maybe that will actually help push it along?
No, thanks a lot. Once again, good afternoon to any of the diehards who are still in the room. Otherwise, it looks like we're losing the battle with the good weather outside. But I do want to thank to Christoph and to Carice for setting up this very valuable event to talk about things that are kind of germane to Hungary and everybody in this room. So before I answer that, there's a map if somebody can bring up.
Yes.
It's difficult to talk about these things without a map. And this is a proprietary map of the Trias Association, but I'll go through and spend some time. I don't have a laser pointer. It's useful to talk about reality than artificial construct, and especially a think tank. I spend too much time embedded in the question whether IMEC is small and we should expand it or not. That's not the reality is this is how business works. And IMEC has to fit into it, not that whether I expand IMEC, lower it. So at this time, if you look at it, there's sort of few things happening on their own, which is that India is the fastest growing large economy in the world. That's a fact. I don't care about IMEC or not. Its number one trading partner is America. Its number two is China. Number 3 is UAE, and number 4 is Saudi Arabia. So whether there's IMEC, there is no IMEC, India is going to be trading more with UAE and with Saudi Arabia. That's a given fact of the issue. European Union is in a situation, and so is America, that is trying to diversify out of China. India, Vietnam are the obvious one. So is Korea. So these are natural driving fundamental economic changes. And these economic changes will support growing convergence of Indo-Mediterranean trade. That Indo-Mediterranean trade today happens 99% through Suez Canal. So talking about IMEC as some sort of, somebody kept saying this morning, we are not into competition. We are exactly in the bloody job of competition. That's the whole point. You come to this think tank, you do polite stuff, you put people to sleep, you say, I'm inclusive, I'm not into competition. You are in competition, that's the name of the game. But you are in competition without exclusivity. You're not saying, I'm going to compete, but I don't want anybody else to play any role, largely because you cannot control it. So the trade is going to be dominant through Suez Canal. So any discussion of IMEC or Indo-Mediterranean without Suez is on top of it is nonsensical. It's like talking about energy security without talking about nuclear and or natural gas. You can talk as much as you like, but you're not going to get there. The second point, the two alternatives, is fascinating. One is to say, hey, let's go from India to Dubai, and then let's do a trade road rail networks across the Gulf. We go to Haifa and we go up. And right off the top, as my good friend Francesco Parisi mentioned, the Turks said, no, the best way is go through Basra up to Sikandar and then go up that way. All that indicates is there is a good amount of demand. There are people who are responding to demand signals and saying, hey, I want to get into this game and I want to go forward. So that's a fact. We put that one on one end. Then you come, and that's most of the, as been mentioned this morning, most of the energy and the impetus is on the India, Middle East, Gulf side. The Europeans are somewhat confused, as is their tend to be. They got too many things, juggling a lot of stuff. So first, they cannot figure out, can they compete among themselves as to which is the IMEC? So the French and the Indians have a good thing going, so they've said Marseille is the end point, repeated today even by the UAE ambassador, that, India, UAE, and then we'll go to Marseille. We have good friends from Greece who are saying Piraeus and Thessaloniki is the way to go. And the Italians are, earlier on were confused because their main port is Genoa. So there's a competition among these national ports in Europe, whether it's Genoa, whether it's Marseille, whether it's Piraeus. I think all of them are useful. But today, if you're taking Indian trade to Europe, then 90% goes through Suez Canal and goes to Rotterdam and to Hamburg. So it doesn't go to Marseille, it doesn't go to Piraeus. It's go to Rotterdam and Hamburg and then comes down into the industrial heartland. So sort of makes sense that if you were able to develop Trieste, you can go to the same area a little bit quicker. And since there was an Austro-Hungarian Empire, then that is and Trieste was their marine gateway historically. It can be resuscitated to do exactly that role today. That's also a fact. Now Central and Eastern European economies are the fastest growing, the most dynamic economies in Europe. For them to use and realize their economic potential, they need a marine gateway. It can't just be landlocked. Their marine gateway is either Gdansk and Gdynia on the north, on the Baltic, or come down to Trieste. So I'll have, my good friend Jim Carafano is going to go into this idea of how linking free and open spaces. The question not is that I take my little think tank point and I say, this is how I ought to do it, whether I expand, whether I don't expand, whether I do this, whether I do a track 2, whatever. You have to see how the world is unfolding and where you can help, just like Dan Rundy said. What are the small steps we can do to nudge them where the water is already flowing, as opposed to recreating the whole river? So one of the water important is the Indo-Mediterranean convergence. The other is the important sort of 3 Cs connection, the connectivity between Baltic, Black, and the Adriatic. And then, since our good friend from Caspian Policy Center are here, it's important to talk about, if we're going to talk about India, Middle East, Europe corridor, it's worthwhile to have a corollary to it, which is the Central Asia, Caucasus, Europe corridor. If I say that, most people can understand it. If I say middle corridor, at least an idiot like me, a non-expert like me, I don't know what the north is, what the south is. There's an old story in America. You know, why did the movie The Madness of King George IV failed in America? Because we hadn't watched the movie of Madness of the King George the First, the second, and the third, so it was very difficult to get to the damn fourth movie. And so the middle corridor, first I have to figure out which of the north one is, which of the south one is, but if I say Central Asia, Caucasus, Europe, it's kind of self-explanatory a little bit. So I think that's, now the question, underlying theme here was whether I expand, don't expand. I think that's, to me, that's not that germane a question. The more important thing is, if I can make the river big enough, the tributaries will flow into it. That's the way the world works. So if I can make the Indo-Mediterranean connectivity to a degree where a lot of money is changing hands, it'll suck in eastern coast of Africa. They'll come into this. It'll help a lot ASEAN and Indo-Pacific to come into this. And it also help the complete sort of economic revival and optimization of Eastern Central Europe. Because that, I think that's the heart of it in some ways. So that's the whole point, which is a pleasure to work with Jim in this sort of effort. So you'll see a lot of dotted lines, so that it's already in it, that Indo-Pacific flows in, the Indo-Pacific, East Africa flows in. You got stuff coming out of Nigeria to Morocco coming into the Europe on the energy corridor and energy pipelines and going. So also on the road that is going here, people said, what's in America? So there are 2 main bottlenecks in global trade. One is Suez Canal, the other one is Panama Canal. So the trade that is happening from Vietnam, India to United States also follows this. It doesn't stop in Europe. It goes all the way through Suez Canal and over to the East Coast. But I think if the European Indo-Mediterranean grows, you'll have greater trade that goes with Atlantic as well. So that's a clear sort of thing. I've got a lot more, but I'm going to stop it and have Q&A and have taken. One more thing I think is useful to say it. There's a lot of hand-wringing about, you know, by Americans, unfortunately, and a lot of European others about President Trump and where America stands or doesn't stand and all that stuff. And so there's rhetoric, you know, you may like it or not like it. There's something that I find objectionable. But then there are actions. And so I think it's really important to see what the actions are, including even in Ukraine, I mean, with all the ups and downs to where we are today. On IMEC, the one leader that has been the most direct and evocative about this is President Trump. He's the one who said, I am looking forward to helping building one of the most important trade corridors from India to Israel to Italy that'll bring, and extending it to the United States, that'll include ports, energy cables, and digital cables, a lot of digital cables. And then he said, this is a big development. Neither Modi, nor any European leader, nor any UAE leader has spoken this strongly. And this wasn't in his writing, it was the one in his brief. This is what he, off the cuff, said in a press conference. So I think this hand-wringing about where America is or not is a little bit blown up. I'll stop there and take Q&A as we go.
So, because I have a few questions also, but Dr. Lee, is Vietnam interested in what Kosh just explained and described enthusiastically, or you're waiting, seeing, where do you stand?
No, we're not interested at all. Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you first for, thank you the organizers for inviting me today for giving me such a precious opportunity to speak out today about IMEC and its perspectives. And let me to start by the question posed at the beginning of the panel. Is it the right thing about the expansion idea of IMEC? I think I would prefer have a more simple approach, the interest. I think, the question about is it the right thing? We could answer in the way that what interest it could bring about for the stakeholder, for the players, for the actors in the framework of this initiative. And I think that IMEC expansion is a good idea. And now IMEC has a great opportunity to do that. We could consider the interest of every player in this the initiative, from the IMEC, from the actor in the Indo-Pacific, the middle powers, for example, and even the major power in the when we consider its geopolitical tentative, for example. So I think the idea of expanding IMEC would enhance its legitimacy and its inclusiveness and help align infrastructure development with the priorities of emerging economies. For example, from now on, with that expansion, we can involve many other countries in the Indo-Pacific region, even ASEAN member states, Australia, and even African coastal economies, would signal that the corridor is not an exclusive geopolitical counterweight to China's initiative, Belt and Road, BRI. So from now on, it is rather a multilateral and demand-driven model of connectivity. So the initiative comes from the will of many diverse countries in the initiative. It comes from the demands of all the countries in the initiative. So it could exclude the thought about the tentative of one great power to counterbalance with China, for example. And this expansion can help deepen South-South cooperation, foster shared infrastructure standards, and strengthen supply chain resilience across multiple regions. I think it is the interest of the IMEC initiative in general. From a strategic standpoint, wider participation, including many other countries in the Indo-Pacific region, can enhance IMEC's geopolitical reach. It enabled India, the EU, and the US to expand their strategic footprint in some sub-region in the initiative, like Southeast Asia, in East Africa, in West Pacific without direct confrontation. So it's good. So it can also increase collective bargaining power in global forums such as some Group 20, WTO, and UN bodies, for example, aligning infrastructure development with shared norms like transparency, debt sustainability, and environmental responsibility. I would like to focus on the ASEAN, for example, including Vietnam, for the question if Vietnam is interested in what you have mentioned. In fact, Vietnam, particularly, and other countries in ASEAN, for example, we have played a critical role to initiate many ideas about how to say, to initiate some multilateral institutions of this kind. We already welcome many institutions of this kind because it is beneficial for us as small and middle powers, because we can, how to say, reduce the pressure of any only actors, geopolitical actors in the region. We can diversify the supply chain in the region. We can benefit from the how to say, the investment, the support from developed countries, and in the framework of IMEC, I think it's a very possible. Yeah, it's my idea.
I have to just follow up with one very simple question, not simple, but to use what Kosh just said earlier, and listening to you carefully, you're about geopolitical competition. You're not even attempting to, you don't want to say it out loud, but for Vietnam, from your perspective, I'm not saying this to Vietnamese, yes, IMEC is important in terms of its geopolitical positioning competition vis-a-vis China, let's be honest for a moment. Am I wrong or in this interpretation or not? So I'm trying to translate you to the audience a bit.
Now I think even the bilateral US-China rivalry, it is also a kind of pressure for us. And now I think we have a special geopolitical position next to, we are the neighbor of China, so it is really hard for us to behave.
Push back.
So with China. So now we have no many other choice. We have to profit, to enjoy the multilateralism, and I think the initiatives of IMEC's kind is very, it is suitable for our interest. Yeah.
All right, interesting. So, if I'm not mistaken, from a Korean perspective, Thomas, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Is it geopolitics or geoeconomics or?
It's business.
It's business.
It's business.
All right.
I want to be very, first of all, before I answer the question, there's a lot of things, like you even talked about Vietnam. Khalees, thank you for inviting me. I wasn't quite sure as I was sitting in the audience what I could offer. And I realized if you can go back to the map, and this is where it's interesting.
Yes, somebody in the control. Yes.
I have been to almost every city on this map, except for the parts in Egypt, actually. And that's when it hit me, like, oh, yeah, I've been there. Yep, I've been there, been there. And part of it is I reflect the interest of business, not just for Koreans, but for Americans as well. And let me go into that a little bit and answer your question. Why for Koreans it's business, for Americans under Trump, it's going to be more about business. But at the same time, there's ideology as well. For Koreans, because it's such a small export, it's an exporting powerhouse. But limited resources, it needs to work with everybody. So for example, to my friends in the Middle East, assalamu alaikum, Korea has been in Saudi Arabia since 1969. I just came back from the Saudi Korea Expo in Seoul, actually met all the people at PIF, for example, okay? And I spent 6 months, as I mentioned before, in both Dubai and Abu Dhabi as well. So there's a lot of things that I am involved with. And it's just the nature of business where you want to be there to understand the environment. Most people don't realize the major roads in KSA were developed by Hyundai on the Jung. And so we've been, as the Korean side of me will tell you that. The American side, I want to address this question of IMEC, why this is so important about why IMEC. It didn't hit me until, as I was thinking about my own activities, I can say this openly because I just got a text from my handlers from the U.S. My background is private equity, but I actually been working with both ADIA and PIF, Mubabla, and I have a personal client, which is the royal group of Sheikh Tanoon himself. So I don't understand that part of the world. But also, I have clients in China. The largest CITIC group is my client, and also a couple of Korean chaebols as well. And I guess in many ways, I can offer the practical view of things. I wish I had known more about IMEC, because I've been having so many more conversations dispersed. If I had known there was a forum that I could actually work with, it would have made my life a lot easier in terms of bringing the audience together for first discussions, and from there we can break off into others. Another example, in Vietnam, there's over 1 million Koreans there, okay? They built some of the largest factories there. Most people don't realize that. And Vietnam, going forward, will be the exit point or the entry point for a lot of Chinese products, low-cost products through Vietnam. That's the strategy right now by the Chinese. So I see, and today when I was hearing everything, I'm like, damn, I was involved in that, damn, okay, that, I've done all this stuff. So I'll give you a classic example so I can talk about it now. Tomorrow I'm going to Kiev. This is my second time. I am representing the Trump administration. I'm going there as a private citizen, working with the 2 largest mineral companies, and I'm already, PPP already in my head, because we didn't have an IMEC. Instead, we actually developed our version of IMEC with members of the NSC and DNI, and how we pick certain clients that we know we can work with, that we can actually take an example of a company and provide funding through the U.S. Exim Bank, through DFC, for example, the insurance, lines of insurance on the project, and possibly, no one like to openly talk about it, we do have a sovereign fund, okay? And also, in addition, I was in Korea because I was talking to PIF, and I was in Riyadh last week as well, so that I can actually get them involved, Manara and Maidan, about, can you come with us? Because I like to create a consortium of strong U.S. allies, of U.S., KSA, and more importantly, Republic of Korea as well. People that would understand what graphite is, especially for EVs, lithium batteries, et cetera. So I would have been so much easier for me if I was involved with IMEC first and actually bringing the folks here that I could actually talk about business. And this is where I think IMEC can really serve the purpose. I don't know how many of you guys are practitioners, okay? And I felt a little overwhelmed because I'm a passive learner and reader of strategy, of foreign policies, and I'm just in awe of all of you guys and how you think about things. In many ways, what I do is I take some of those concepts and actually turn it into reality. I put the money on the ground with investors. So I understand what the sovereign funds are looking for. So any of the projects, this report in Italy, I'm sitting there going, you just answered something for me. When I get the minerals out of the Black Sea there, okay, where do I stop? Right there in Italy. So stuff like that hit me today. I'm like, wow, I should have been here a long time ago, and I'm grateful that I did, nevertheless. So in response to your question, it's, again, for Koreans, it's business. It always has to be. At the end of the day, they have expertise. And the thing in my travels is that when you first see me, I am Korean. But when you talk to me, I'm American. And it's funny how people react to me. It depends on their needs. Koreans have a history of being really good operating partners. They stay. They don't leave. Americans will get the profits and leave, okay? So it depends on the situation, but I hope I answered your question.
Can I just build up on that? So I think, thanks a lot for what you said. Again, whether America's bought off into this or not, we just made a pretty big deal with Ukraine on the mineral side. Absolutely. Now, when we try to extract it, just to say, how are we going to go? Italy's one way, but now America has a vested interest in not only making sure that we can get out of the Black Sea and keep Black Sea free and open to be able to get out that way, but also connect Odessa and Western Ukraine with Poland to the Baltic. Yes. So we can truck it out that way. So this is an American vested interest. So this is really important. That's what I started off by saying. I've been in this corridor business since 2010. When I was posted in Afghanistan, We try to do the new Silk Road. Then it turned into the Chinese came back to us and said, no, it's not new Silk Road, it's the old new Silk Road. And then we're going to build belts, and we're going to build roads, and we're going to join Belt and Road, and now we are where we are at. The number one thing is that when a politician and bureaucrats start about corridors, we have all the questions that we spent this morning. Who's the leader? Who's the coordinator? Who's going to take the lead on this? Oh my God, there's no lead. Isn't there no American pointed on this? That's utter nonsense. Even if they did, it's going to go anywhere. What's already happening is, thank God you are being on this panel and talking about it. So there is a lot of energy all across this board because of the fundamental economic drivers that I mentioned. So irrespective of whether there is a one country leading or special envoy, this energy is happening. The second part of this, that also answers the other question which most think tankers and academic and journalists, and particularly Europe, are more consumed by. Oh my God, Gaza is going to derail it. No, it ain't going to derail it. It may slow it down, but again, it'll certainly go through the Gaza, through the Suez Canal. The railroad maybe is a little bit delayed. Oh my God, the Pakistan conflict is going to somehow derail and slow this down. There's, again, a fundamental point there. Russia and Pakistan cannot sustain any military campaign without Chinese backing. So America knows about it. So the yahoos in America who think we ought to focus on Indo-Pacific at the cost of Europe are kind of smoking something else. So you got to have, the question is how this is all related. Now, having said that, let me just spend two important points. I think there's a mention earlier on how this is different from BRI. In the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, we had the G7. I was one of the G7 Sherpa dealing with, the G7 were dealing with quality infrastructure. There's a lot of push on me through all the first 4 years that America, we ought to come across and come up with our own BRI. What's our response to BRI? What's our response to BRI? The last thing we want to do is have another nonsensical BRI bullshit, that somehow one country goes around doing it. It needed to be something which was bottom up, that every country had an interest to do so. India invests in India. Other questions think tankers would ask, who's going to invest in it? Well, every damn country who signed up is going to invest in their own thing. India is going to invest in India. Dubai is going to invest. Saudi is going to invest in Saudi. Israel is going to invest in Israel. Jordan was mentioned earlier that probably need. But Europe will have to invest on its own side. To that end, in this conference, it's really important to talk about the roles of three important countries: India, Italy, and Hungary. India at this moment, without any, whether it takes leadership or not, it is absolutely, we're not going to repeat the point of Dubai and Saudi Arabia. It's also holding its Raisina with the general there, the Middle East Raisina, and talking about it. Now they're going to be here, the Indian ORF, the public relations arm of the foreign ministry. They're going to have a Budapest forum here, because this is where the largest Indian investment is in Hungary. So they're going to have a Budapest forum here. They are very much committed now to Armenia, which they're going to have a Yerevan dialogue in Armenia, because they go through the Armenia connection there. Then they're going to have a Mediterranean Raisina. So India is already engaged and moving on all fronts in this role. Now comes to Italy. Again, Italy appointed a special envoy. The only people I know leading to you, and I hope you meet with Francesco Parisi, is that the Triestian businesses came together and said, let's have a business-led front there. And as a result, largely because of their doing, their foreign minister went to India, appointed a special envoy, and then said, I'm going to do an IMEC foreign ministerial in Italy. Really important point. Just last bit to Hungary. Hungary today is taking a really important role of having a relationship with India, largest FDI. Its way to get out is through Trieste, so they have invested in Trieste and port. So it's a key country to work on this. And Hungary has to decide whether it's going to place footsie with China and be a pain for EU, or get into a really effective partner in this new game of New Golden Road and lead the work. So these are important issues as they go forward.
You had so many jewels right there, diamonds. So, for example, why I think Hungary is important. Anybody here from Poland or anything like that? Anybody?
I was just in Poland.
So, teraz, excuse me?
Ethnically Polish.
I think so. Nigel Marcelli, Polish po polsku. So I speak Polish, okay? Part of that, what I've learned about EU politics is, I'm grateful to the Danube Institute because I'm a very conservative leading individual in America. And what I could say, I'll get even yelled at by my Polish girlfriend for saying these things. But EU is kind of in a paralysis, right? Hungary understood that either they could still play with the same people or they could actually start branching themselves outside of the EU where real growth is happening. Real growth is India. India is basically taking a very similar play model that Korea did for a long time. It's just they're doing it with more dollars behind it now. So it's fascinating to see that happening. And especially for Vietnam, and what it is about Vietnam is people don't realize the manufacturing production capabilities are amazing in that country, and it's developing even more and more over time. It will be a power hub. It is, but it will even be more so as they move up the value chain in manufacturing operations as well. So a lot of your points, it's incredible what's happening here. So I'm sitting here looking at this, again, looking at this map, think, okay, Jeddah, many times, Daman is, of course, Saudi Aramco. And at the end of June, I actually will be going to Damascus to meet with the president and his team about how do we bring capital information and possibly the Middle East. So these are the things that I'm grateful to have met as many as I can with you guys, because I'd love to hear how you think about the framing of it, because you're literally going to create the recipe for me, and I might tweak a little bit, but I'm going to use that recipe to actually make the soup.
Dr. Lee, you listened to Thomas talking about Vietnam, and Vietnam being a more influential economic hub. Does that come with geopolitics also, with being geopolitically more leading in its region and beyond? Is IMEC connected in any way to this?
Yeah, I think now, at least in the region, in the ASEAN region, Vietnam plays a critical role. So I think we have, as you may know, Vietnam is now at the play a central role to initiate many ideas to create some frameworks within the ASEAN, for example, to strengthen the solidarity and even to strengthen the ASEAN's future. And so I think now with the IMEC initiative, who is now considering to expand its sphere. I think we are interested in that, and even we can evaluate the needs, the general need of other countries in the region, and we can help, we can support for the involvement of these countries in the region to this initiative. I think it's possible, it's feasible. As I have mentioned earlier, such initiative like IMEC, it is suitable to the Vietnam's interest when we have the obvious need to diversify the supply chain, to reduce the pressure from other countries, from other geopolitical, from the more giant countries next to Vietnam. I think that it could be considered by Vietnam. So we may act to push this process, and that depends on some other calculation, because now we have talked about the benefits of this initiative's expansion, but we can also consider the risk, the inconvenience of this idea. About the risk, I think everything has the double-faced impacts. And about the risk of this expansion, we have to take into account. Firstly, IMEC now the volume is still limited. The number of member countries in this framework, but with it is successfully expanded, the number of member states will be increased. And how will it impact on the decision-making process of this initiative? It will be harder, I think, and surely I can assure that, because more countries join, it may be harder to
reach
the consensus. It would complicate the consensus building and institutional coherence.
I was about to say that the Europeans are masters in that respect. They keep on expanding and then.
I don't know if Europeans or this group is. I think maybe this group.
It is another.
A question which really is not there, which is to say, do I expand IMEC? So first of all, what does that really mean? Again, it's a kind of completely a think tank question. And so this is not Europeans. We should be the guilty one. Because again, it's the Indo-Mediterranean convergence. That is going to happen through Suez Canal. The narrow definition of IMEC is building a road rail network. What the heck is Vietnam or anybody else going to do in that? That connection is just to have Saudi Arabia and UAE and Israel and Jordan make this connection. Once this connection is made, fine, it'll flow through. But what am I having Indo-Pacific and Africa to discuss a road and rail network across Saudi Arabia? So I think the positing of the question is a sort of broader phenomena that Indo-Mediterranean trade is growing. 90% is through Suez Canal. If we can make this thing happen across, it'll be add to it for all the reason of resiliency what that mentioned. God bless the Turks to build that through Iraq. That's all fantastic. Now, again, sorry, you go ahead and then I'll come back.
No, I want to add something though. This is critical for your point. The harder flow traffic that people don't quite see as much until you're in India is the amount of dollars that are flowing from India to Singapore back to Dubai, that triangle, is amazing, the amount of cash that's flowing in that area. That's how Vietnam and Singapore, that connection. What I see the value of IMEC is simply this, okay? It is really important. When you grow an organization too big like the world, like the UN, it loses its purpose, really. But there is a value when you have an intercontinental type of business that you need that coordination, okay? That's where it really happens. That's the gap. And that's where you need an IMEC. So you may have to have an IMEC East, IMEC, whatever you want from a branding perspective. But people, if you don't actually live and spend time in this area, you really don't see the amount of money that flows from this triangle here. It's insane how much money that is.
No, but again, you can go one step forward to make more specifically. I was hoping that's where you were going. So if you looked and said, okay, gosh, another nonsensical comment, but this connection and what the heck you got to do about building across. That is absolutely the most fertile opportunity for Korea and Japan to work with Saudi Arabia, whether I call it Indo-Pacific or JIMEC or whatever, on doing trade transit because they are the best at it. Okay, now, again, you can talk about it, but because what did Hitachi just do? It worked with India to develop, update the trunk road, that basically from, Delhi to Mumbai to Chennai to Calcutta to back to Delhi. Hitachi did that. That is what needs to be done from Dammam to Haifa and stuff like that. So that is a direct way to make this connection without blowing it up in any big way, but an important role for Korea and Japan within that construct.
All right.
And so one more thing, I think that's why, I want to give a big shout out to Ambassador Carla Sam. She's our leader. I mean, she's outstanding. And it's useful to talk about in a much more evocative term than IMEC. You hear IMEC, if I was and when I heard of it, I thought it was a new kind of a watch that came out, some new kind of, clock or something. So I think the notion of a new golden road, and it came from William Dalrymple's book that came out last fall, which wrote the Golden Road, and all that talked about, again, the fundamentals, that from largely 400 BC to 1700, India was about 30 to 40% of global GDP. So it drove the trade this way. And most of that trade between India and Roman Empire, which paid the customs of which custom duties paid 30% of Roman Empire's annual sort of revenue or budget, that took exactly the same three routes which are on this. They went up to the end of Suez Canal, got onto camels, and went before Suez Canal. They went up through Basra and went up that way to Sikkim. That's the road they followed. That's the common road that'll come back because, again, driven by India, because it's rising 8 to 10% of global GDP and growing. One small point, great map before this on the semantics. A lot of discussion of India Central. That map, which was on before this as a default, you play that map, it'd be very difficult for Indian officials to be coming here and talking about it because how Kashmir is portrayed. Just a pointer on it. So you think that'll hide them? The Indians are stupid.
No. Gosh. To your point, I haven't spent time in India, okay, and I was also in Pakistan. It's very fascinating when I try to go from Pakistan to India, they would not have it, okay. But the thing that my experience in hitting in these countries is Saudi Arabia, where I consider it the biggest. I have never seen they know how to trade. People forget that, they really do, and a lot of it was constructed within. Trade within, when you get there, and there's a true desire to move Saudi Arabia to the next level where it should be. India, I think, will be limited in one regard. It's still very homogeneous there, okay, and that will be its limit. And unfortunately, I believe Abu Dhabi and the UAE did over too much in many ways. But Saudi Arabia has this balance that when I visit the region many times, I see a youth energy level I haven't seen before. That I'd say, you know what, plant your time and effort here, and this will be the center point of the world, actually, at some point. And it's not a coincidence that there is a deep relationship and friendship and respect between the United States and Saudi Arabia. It's genuine. I can truly say it's genuine.
All right. We have time for one question from the audience, and I'm taking a risk and hoping for a good question. Yes? No, I'm looking at the time. Yes. Yeah, no.
I got a good question.
Oh,
I
good.
promise it's good. So,
your name, if you don't mind. Your name.
Sorry, is it on?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's on.
For the professor, I'm absolutely intrigued by your whole hub on Trieste. I've been there many times. It definitely has great historical connections. It's great that these folks are here. So do you have a vision, starting with what your map is there, to recreate something using Trieste as a hub to really make this thing work? And what is that over the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Another quick one?
Turkey a spoiler? Is Turkey on side? What's the story of Turkey?
I wonder who the question is directed to. I'm not sure. People will be enthusiastic about my answer.
Mr. Perdue.
All right.
I want him to answer and I'll answer.
It's a horrible place to do business. And my firm has the largest resort on the Mediterranean, Italia. I am telling you, it is a horrible place to do business. Inflation, literally 75% annual inflation. It's ridiculous. They have to actually, inflationary tax for holding cash. It's really backwards there. I don't know how to fix that place. I don't even want to, but it's a great place when it comes to a lot of talented young people, et cetera. That question is, there's so much it needs to fix within the country before it really can be effective. to me, they seem to just get into everyone else's business, but they really need to fix their own before. That's why I really don't see them as a factor. They will try, but at the end of the day, for example, in Syria, Syrians don't want the Turks in there. In fact, the Turks and Chinese are the two best builders of low-cost housing in the world, actually, okay? For multiple reasons, because of the Kurds there in Syria, they don't want that influence, but they should be a natural fit. The Syrians are like, no, get them out of here, we don't want them. And so they have their own problems. That's why I would say for now, they will be in the news, they will try to make the news, but they're not very effective.
So with my good brother, I might have a slightly different taste on it. So I think it's difficult to imagine Indo-Mediterranean and Central Asia, Caucasus, Europe trade happen without Turkey. It's just difficult to imagine, period. Now, Turkey is a spoiler in many ways, from Israel to Pakistan. So it's a political spoiler in many ways. But here, where I started from saying it's best to look at where business is going, and business will flow through Turkey, period. Turkey is an important partner of Trieste, so all the European imports by ship that goes to Europe, 70% goes through Trieste today. So it can't go without it. Turkey already asked and said, I'm doing, Basra to not only ISIS, Secundrum is where the first time Alexander beat Darius by pushing him around the ocean. That's that town. They said, well, we're going to go Basra to Baghdad to Berlin. I mean, Turks love they're kind of a big deal. So who knows? I think the proof's in the pudding. Let's just see what the role is. That's the Turkey part. I think the question then comes down to the friend over there about what my vision of Trieste is. My vision of Trieste is to help Trieste find its vision and effectuate it. That's my vision of Trieste. Because I'm not a Triestinian, even though it's an easy town to fall in love with. But I do want to see the power of business. I mean, and modest folks that may seem unassuming, Francesco Parisi, his son here, you got other people talking here. I mean, Triestinians raised this issue to a level where both the administration in Rome took it seriously, appointed a special envoy, and then launched a notion that they're going to have a ministerial meeting in Trieste. That's the Trieste vision. From outside, going back to the point, when non-business people lecture and come up with the idea of where the corridors ought to be, it makes sense where historically it's been and where the water flows downstream, so you can push it as opposed to upstream. If you're going to go to Central Eastern Europe, going anywhere else is sort of somewhat nonsensical. Trieste is it in some ways. That is why it is the #1 oil importing port in the Mediterranean, because that's where the closest way to put the pipelines in. This is also the second fastest growing port in Europe, the first being Gdansk and Gdynia up on north. So again, the connecting of these two kind of makes sense because that's where the economic interest is. Genoa is a transatlantic port of Italy, not an Indo-Mediterranean port of Italy. Marseille delivers France. It's not going to go all the way to Germany to import stuff. Piraeus is a very important transshipment port with ships one way or the other. Putting it on a train or a road going all the way up the Balkans is not the point of view. So Trieste, by definition, is the place to kind of go in and push in that particular context. And this is where both America and other people can help elevate this particular story, which wouldn't have been elevated without things going forward.
Before we wrap up, Dr. Lee, you listened to this discussion. You'll be heading back, I guess, day after tomorrow to Hanoi. If your government asks, you were now in Budapest on a conference in IMEC, is this something Vietnam, pursue, get more involved in? Should this be a priority for us? What would be your answer? If your government will ask you, is IMEC worth our attention? Should it be a priority to focus on for our government, for ASEAN? What will your answer be?
I think the problem to take into account now is to see the final objective, the final goals of this initiative. Now we always mention that it is oriented to the common growth, economic growth, the sustainability, the common goods of the international society, of the broad region, intercontinental, in the framework of intercontinental initiative. So I think it is enough, it is good enough to consider. And I think it could be a choice. It could be a choice, but I cannot say that it is good to. It is time. It is time to get involved or not. But normally we have to consider to find it is something like ripeness to decide. Yeah.
So in other words, let me translate you again, because you're very polite. You're telling us, well, you have some potential, but prove first the potential, then call us back. Mm-hmm. Am I wrong?
In fact, I forgot to mention another thing, another important thing about IMEC perspective, a kind of risk too. It is a double-faced risk, because on the one hand, it has to how to say, to not to make someone think IMEC initiative is a counterweight to China's. It can threat its sphere of influence, but in other way, we can. It means that we should not to become a threat for anyone, and on the other hand, we have to prevent from the countermeasure from China, for example.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. And on that cautious note, I want to thank the three speakers, Thomas, Han, and Kaush. And thank you all for your attention at this difficult hour, just before the coffee break. Really, you have my admiration for hanging, pulling it through. And we'll take a 15-minute break, right? Yes. Thank you very much.
So today's last session is the second part of the twin sessions, is expanding IMEC stakes and benefits, connecting the Global South and the Indo-Pacific. The second part is going to be focusing on the Global South. The panel is going to be moderated by James Carafano, Senior Counselor to the President and E.W. Richardson Fellow at the Heritage Foundation.
Well, this is the most important. No, really. This is the real undiscussed value of IMEC is not what it's going to do for all the people that already are making all the money from global trade. It's the opportunity for other countries, and in particular, I think this has enormous implications for North, West, and East Africa. We only have one African here, but so you can speak for the entire continent. That's not unusual. That happens all the freaking time. But we also have other countries which actually do business in Africa and with Africans as well, and they have their own interests as well. So I just very briefly say from an American perspective, we don't have a clear U.S. strategy on Africa yet. But we have a lot of very interesting indicators. And I think a couple of them are, one is, and this isn't really just an Africa thing, this is this administration in general, where the code word is pragmatic. The United States is looking for pragmatic partnerships with countries on like-minded issues. So it's not about democracy promotion. It's not about exporting a political agenda. It's what do we do that makes sense for both of us, that makes life better for both of us. The other one is, if you haven't picked up on this yet, this is not an administration that is really like super enamored with foreign assistance. Not because they don't like to be generous. Actually, Donald Trump is one of the most generous human beings you'd ever want to meet. It's because it sucks. Traditional foreign aid actually delivers very little aid. Most of it never actually gets to the people who are intended for the program. We used to talk about the military-industrial complex. We should be talking about the NGO-industrial complex, which is way more insidious. And a lot of these programs don't actually have outcomes which are valued in the countries in which they're directed and which actually deliver on the outcomes that they suggest. So this administration is much more interested in foreign direct investment, partnerships, and joint opportunities. So when you hear those kinds of things, this is the definition of the IMEC project. So this is really tailor-made for the United States. And if I could just take 1 second for what we have been talking about is, you know, if you look at all these corridors, there isn't like a direct dotted line to the United States. And this is the entire point. Everybody thinks about corridors as about moving stuff. But corridors create synergistic growth. They create innovation hubs. They create new partnerships. They do all kinds of magical things other than moving a cargo container across them. And so what we have argued is the United States should be the world's greatest proponent for not just the 3 Cs initiative or the Middle Corridor or IMEC, but looking at these as one single project. Because if you do these things and this is how we're going to do global trade after globalization. And the question is, for the countries that were really left out of globalization, for countries that have rapidly growing demographics, and they need real growth in their economies, and they need jobs, and they need jobs, and they need jobs, how can they benefit from this? So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to just kind of briefly introduce themselves, and we're just going to go down the road here. And I'm going to start with the question is, having had to sit around here, because you can't get away because you're the last panel, so you have to stay anyway. Let me ask you, from everything you've heard today, the question is, what is in it for you? So please just introduce yourself and answer the question. We'll just go down the line.
Okay, thank you for the chance, for the institutes who invited me to speak, and for the moderator to brief shortly what Trump 2.0 means on aid and other issues, on business. And it's my pleasure to be here. It's my second time in Europe, actually. And I have seen, observed in Europe some of the developments that not seen in Africa. Actually, it's very difficult to represent Africa as a whole. I am Gizacho. We call by our first name in Ethiopia, and I'm a proud Ethiopian and African scholar and citizen, a young scholar, who have a BA and MA degree in Ethiopia and had PhD from India. So today, and I'm just affiliated think tank which worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it's not representing the government position which I am speaking today. Today I understand this conference, in my observation, there are a lot of issues which I understand from my observation. What very simple, quick understanding in my mind is an issue of the collective waste. It's an issue which I understand from the conference and how they understand connectivity as a collective waste, as a collective waste in its apart forms from the US perspective and from European perspective, and inside the European Union itself, how they understand connectivity from Hungarian perspective is different, from the other European colleagues are different perspectives. And how we understand from African perspective also very important. Connectivity is very essential for Africa as a continent, which we envisioned to be self-reliant and to be a source of reducing, alleviating serious poverty challenges, which is very critical in supporting those poverty reduction programs in Africa through the Agenda 2063 of the African Union agenda, which is achieving prosperous Africa. And one of the issues which I understand is Ethiopia. We found in a second largest population in Africa, next to Nigeria. We had more than 120 million population sizes, maybe more. Some of the collective European countries, some of it. And we had now a growing economy in East Africa. And that needs connectivity to the sea, to the other areas in Asia, Middle East, Europe, and the rest Africa countries. In Ethiopia, we open up our economy since last year. The new government is opening up the economy. Since the last 2 weeks, the government already approved in its parliament and council of ministers about opening some of the sectors for the foreigners, including the real estate sectors, which is totally banned foreign investors to invest in Ethiopia for the last, in its history of the country. So this connectivity helps for European partners and other to enter into as a first gate to Africa through bridging the Africa, Europe, and the Middle East countries, and not competing with existing Africa initiatives and existing other global initiatives. We have to see as a supplementary rather than as a competition. If that's a competition, it will create a foreign policy dilemma and strategic confusion for the states, like not to be suffocated through these middle power competitions. Ethiopia, one of the highest investor countries from China is the first, Saudi Arabia is the second, UAE is now, and India have more than 100 companies in Ethiopia because we are the East African hub, and we have the most prestigious airlines in Africa, as most of you know. Some of the connectivity is built through Djibouti, through China, the railway connectivity. So we need some complementary that connecting the Ethiopia is a landlocked country, but have an aspire and an ambition, not simple aspiration, but an interest to the sea, access to the sea. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Nurban. I'm not Israeli. I'm not Indonesian. I'm actually American. My parents are from Sri Lanka, but one of my sort of projects these days is... You are the world. Yeah, I guess you could say that, yeah. I like, I'm enjoying connecting Israelis and Indonesians. I've always thought it was really important to connect the world's largest Muslim majority country and the world's only Jewish majority country. So what is in it for Indonesia? So I worked for the World Bank for about a decade in Indonesia, which is actually the largest country office outside of the DC headquarters. And one of the things I learned about infrastructure development and development financing over there was really the sort of raising of standards that comes from connectivity and infrastructure development all the way down to the subnational level. when it comes to Indonesia, just a quick 101, sometimes when I come to different parts of the world and I talk about Indonesia, not everyone knows what's going on. And it is the world's third largest democracy. It is the world's fourth largest country by population. It is a G20 member state, which is, of course, one of the requirements being that it should have $1 trillion GDP. It is an OIC member state, Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It's an OPEC and an APEC member state as well. And of course, it's a secretariat of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So it's a pretty important rising middle power. And when we look at even the geography of it, from one end to the other end, the distance is the same as the distance from London to Afghanistan. 3 time zones. This is a pretty big country, 17,500 islands, 360 different ethnic groups, over 700 languages, and over 1,200 religions, even though it's the largest Muslim majority country. So what does this mean for IMEC? And what does this mean for infrastructure development as well? Well, first of all, Indonesia is multilateral to the core. As I mentioned, all these different multilateral groupings are really, really important for its sort of interests in the world, its interests in the sub-region as well, APEC, OPEC, you name it. Now, with IMEC, personally, I think it is critical for Indonesia to join IMEC. So with my apologies to India, it will be double IMEC, Or if we add Japan, which I also think is important, there will be a JIIMEC, something like that, ideally. How to sell Indonesia on that, and what is in it for Indonesia? First, the potential growth of new institutions. So as a G20 member state, Indonesia enjoys all the surrounding institutions around it. So for example, there's the U20, which is all the different universities which are part of those G20 member states, all get to cooperate and collaborate and talk with each other in the run-up to the summit every year. There is the Y20, which is the youth. There is the Science 20, the S20, which is all the different scientists who meet up and talk and collaborate across the 20 member states. Why can't we do something like that for IMEC? These institutions might look different, but I think that Indonesia could benefit quite a bit from these types of institutions. Indonesia having more startups in the ASEAN region than even Singapore, why not have a startup sort of institution as well across the IMEC member states, including Indonesia, hopefully. But really, what I think is important as well is the fact that according to ADL surveys, 93% of Indonesians have never met a Jew. 93%. And I do think that for...
Well, it should have come to my neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely, So there needs to be more exposure. There needs to be more interaction. We need to have, what Carissa and I have talked about before. We actually met on a flight. Thanks for the invitation, Carissa, as well as to the Danube Institute, is we need a stable international system. And that might sound very aspirational and so forth, but when there are more people-to-people interactions across religions, faiths, worldviews, so on and so forth, that does tend to proliferate over time. That's not what I'm saying. That's what the research, the literature out there tends to demonstrate. So I do think that that is important from a business point of view, from a science diplomacy point of view, and so on and so forth. But finally, the last thing I'll say about this is, besides the fact that we might need a Google Maps for everything underground at the technical level, power, water, gas, fiber optics, you name it, internet, so on and so forth, besides that fact, there can be better technical assistance provided by countries that Indonesia is not always exposed to. That includes Israel, of course, as well. And through that technical assistance, we can reduce a lot of the problems that we see between those 17,500 islands. For example, it costs more to ship goods between Jakarta, the capital, where I tend to be based, to the opposite end in West Papua. It costs more to send a good there than it costs from Jakarta to Shanghai. So how can we reduce and improve the sort of logistics and operations of that? I'll leave that to our IMEC friends to figure that out. But those are some initial ideas that I think that should be taken into account if we are going to include, the world's third largest democracy in IMEC and improve this sort of connectivity between these different member states through maritime highways, through undersea cables, through other ways of producing better connectivity. So those are just some ideas. Thank you.
So you just grab Mike. So let me throw you just a little bit of a curveball, right? So you could talk about what's good for India, but I think we all know about what's good for India is. But you could say that, right? But what I'm really interested in is India has partnerships throughout the Indian Ocean and across into Africa. And so what would be really interesting as well, actually for me more interesting, what is in it for India in its partnerships as a regional actor through not just through the Indian Ocean and the east coast of Africa, but also its emerging partnerships in the Middle East.
Thank you, and delighted to be here, and thank you for this invitation, Danube Institute and the Signal Group. I come from that country which somebody described this morning, the lousy democracy. You should come to India, it's hardly lousy. It's a very vibrant, noisy, difficult, chaotic democracy, so anything but lousy. Vibrant and, just too noisy sometimes. My name is Happy Mohan Jacob. I teach at the university there. I'm also the founder of a think tank based out of New Delhi. I live and work in Delhi, and I have not really heard much about IMEC in Delhi. I mean, that's a shame. Seriously, I run a think tank. I go to pretty much every think tank discussion in Delhi, but and I think this is a place where we need a lot of honesty, right? I mean, IMEC 2023. Right, so it's not been really that long for us to have discussed this particular idea threadbare. So I will be honest about it. We haven't heard, there isn't much discussion in Delhi about IMEC, even though India may be in a pivotal sort of location when it comes to IMEC or the Indo-Pacific. There's a lot of conversation about the Indo-Pacific. What does India want? Right, I mean, it is the largest growing, it is what, fastest growing large economy in the world. It is 1,400 million people, $4 trillion economy, and 20% of its economy is even informal, it's not even formal economy. If you look at the Indian borders, you will see 15,000 kilometers of India's border, Pakistan, China, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Bhutan. How do you describe these countries? Not friendly at all, somewhat friendly, difficult. That is not the space that India looks at when it looks at the rest of the world, to sort of go to the rest of the world. Flip the Indian map and look at the border from the Rann of Kutch southwards and the Bay of Bengal. That's 15,000 kilometers of India's maritime borders, which is full of opportunities. That's where the Indo-Pacific comes in. So here is a country that is shedding its obsession from continental sort of thinking about its grand strategy, or shedding its continental obsession and taking to the Indo-Pacific, to the maritime space in a big way. It is a country that is shedding its fear about free trade agreements and moving fast into signing a slew of free trade agreements with EU, UK, United States, Gulf Cooperation Council, whatnot, Australia. You have several of these FTAs that are being signed. This is a country that wants a lot more market access internationally, wants to get through to the rest of the world, etc., etc. People often ask me, you're also in the Quad, you are in the SCO, you are in BRICS, you are in IMEC, you are in pretty much everything that happens in the world. What explains that? Well, my answer is very simple. It's a 1,400 million people country. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. A 10 million country in Europe can probably do that. We simply can't do that. So I think you will find us everywhere. India is too huge. Indians are everywhere. You sort of, or Indian origin people are pretty much everywhere. You're not. So, but that's just the way, the country has sort of panned out internationally. The point that I'm trying to make, and I think you made an interesting point, which is you need to have more people talking about IMEC. I think elite conversations about IMEC is important, but you need to have a lot more people in the media, in the think tank community, in the universities talk about IMEC. Otherwise, I'm not very confident IMEC is going to pick up in a big way in the years to come. I'm also not so sure at this point of time, let's say, reflecting and thinking within the strategic community in Delhi, that there is a properly thought out plan behind IMEC. That's a feeling one gets. It's a great idea. It's a great idea, but not all great ideas can be implemented, are thought out properly for implementation. So is there a grand strategy behind IMEC? And I'm saying all of this with all honesty because I come from a country which I think is pivotal to both the Indo-Pacific and IMEC. Even on the Indo-Pacific, there's a lot of lack of clarity in India. India does not have an Indo-Pacific strategy, as it were. It doesn't have Indo-Pacific policy for that matter. We talk about the Indo-Pacific. So we have a tendency to talk about things in multifarious ways without having a grand strategy behind it. So I think this is probably an opportunity, and this is the first time I'm actually attending a full-fledged IMEC conference. So I think this is an opportunity for us to take something back home. Thank you.
So, Richard, you guys should really be into this because I've always thought of Filipinos as kind of the Italians of Asia, right? So, like, Philippines, Italy, like that should be like a cool thing, right? Totally, right? So, over to you. And yeah, and please introduce yourself real quick, and then.
Yes. Oh, can you hear me? Okay. Perfect. Yeah, Italians. We always make that joke too. Richard Haydar, and of course I teach at the University of the Philippines, but I'm also a journalist, vlogger, among other things. So we're as boisterous and dynamic as our Indian friends. And, thank you, first of all, for having a Filipino on this panel. Usually, whenever I'm in an international panel, they get the Singaporeans to do the Southeast Asia thing. And I always hear the same cliche, the big two elephants and the rest are grass. And I always felt that's very problematic because it's more like Lion King, right? Yeah, you got two big elephants, but you got also lions and you got zebras and all sorts of things. So if you really look at the picture in my part of the world, it's really 50 shades of hedging. Right? The Indonesians are hedging it their ways. The Vietnamese are playing their game their own ways. And we Filipinos, we're a U.S. treaty ally. We have a fantastic relationship with not only the first, but also the second Trump administration. But we're also hedging. It's not like we want to put all our eggs in one basket. So I think it's that complexity and that nuance and that common quest for strategic autonomy, which is very important. And that clearly has a geoeconomic dimension. I mean, speaking of the Philippines, fortunately, unlike Indonesia, we're not like a big, invisible nation. I think the problem in Indonesia is that they're so big and at the same time invisible at the same time.
Largest invisible nation in the world.
Yeah, but the Philippines, our problem is that we're always known for the wrong people. So all sorts of imeldific people and kind of our own Italian people. Like, from the boisterous Duterte, who's there in the ICC detention I visited the other month, to Imeldo Marcos, and the son is now in charge. We were always like Asians, but we were also like Latinos. We were 300 years under the Espanol, and if not for you pesky gringos, we would have had our own independent state. But what makes the Philippines really exceptional, and I'm really proud of this, is we're also quote-unquote Western in terms of our belief in a rules-based international order. Definitely not a lousy democracy, but also, we have our problems, we have our issues, we have our midterm elections as we speak right now, but we do believe in a rules-based international order, and I can proudly say, if you look at the entire Southeast Asian offense to Vietnam, we're the only ones standing up to China when it comes to the bullying in the South China Sea. You look at our transparency initiative, we don't have much of an army to speak of, but with the Coast Guard we have, thanks to the Japanese, Americans, French, we're giving the Chinese a good fight, right? But we don't want to be also the Pearl Harbor of Asia. we want an economic dimension there. That's why I really appreciated Senator Rubio back then and now Secretary Rubio in his Senate hearing saying that, our problem with the Philippines is that we took them for granted. It's all about military and strategic. And now, finally, there's more focus on geoeconomics. And this is where things get interesting because it's not only U.S. and Philippines. Japan is a big part of that. Just the other week, I had a meeting with the visiting delegation from Prime Minister Ishiba's office in Manila, just as we had the massive Balikatan exercises. As you know, now we have this new trilateral. I call it JAFOS, so that it rhymes with AUKUS, Japan, Philippines, U.S. trilateral. And a big dimension of that is not only Taiwan and security, but this what you call the Luzon Economic Corridor, $100 billion high-tech infrastructure-driven initiative where we're hoping to finally get the good kind of investments. I come from Baguio City, which was built by the Americans. We have Texas Instruments there for the past half a century. And I always wondered, why is the Philippines doing the mid-range packaging and design and we're not moving up? Taiwan is just barely 1 hour away. Taipei, Kaohsiung is like 40 minutes away from my town. So it makes perfect sense for the Philippines. I mean, we're not as big as India, but we could become this kind of a pivot state in the Pacific. And eventually what I really want to see is this kind of synchronicity when you bring together different projects from the Indian Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, put them together. So, and the big idea that we're now focusing on is, countries like the Philippines or in India, I don't know about Vietnam, but this idea of China-free supply chains, right? I have nothing against China, but I don't want them in my critical infrastructure. Right. I'd rather have Japanese, Korean, Indians or other friends. And I think that is where we have a lot of commonalities that we can build on. So was that, I don't know if that was Italian enough in terms of the vibrancy of that, but I think my advice always to my Japanese friends is be more Italian. Not in terms of the quality of infrastructure, but in terms of promotion of their projects. Because the last thing I want to say here is that people forget, China keeps on saying they have huge investments, but it's just empty pledges. I call it pledge trap. The biggest investor in the Philippines and much of Southeast Asia is Japan, except no one knows it. So I think the Italian part is where they have to a bit emphasize that more enough. And that's where I think we can push back against China in a constructive way and create that good competition.
Yeah, well, you talk with your hands, so that works.
Definitely.
So this panel has been, I think, really important because it illuminates the real value of IMEC. Right? Nobody here is going to build IMEC. Well, the Indians might kick in some bucks, but IMEC is not, as we said before, it is not an alternative to the Belt and Road. It is not somebody's road. IMEC is really an extension of the idea that Abe first introduced, of the idea of free and open spaces. That these is empowering the people in the path. So you're right in that the narrative of the elephants, fight that's the grass against Trump. It's a horrible analogy. First of all, countries are not grass; they have agency, their own things, and you don't want to be grass. You want to be the trees because elephants don't fight in the trees, right? So, I want to phrase this question. Anybody can jump in, and you can do either one, because you actually said something I think that was really brilliant, which Indians often do. Which was, what is it? The real value of IMEC is going to be about creativity. So, what is the big creative thing that a country could extract and build on? And that's what I think what we really want everybody to be thinking about. Not how do you build the railroad? Somebody's going to build the railroad, but what is the big creative thing that's going to help advance your part of the world? Deliver jobs or whatever. So that's one question. The other question, what do you see, having listened to everything today, what's the big obstacle, not for building the railroad, somebody will figure that out, but what's the big obstacle for you in embracing the opportunity of IMEC? So you can come at it from either direction and anybody can start. Do you want to start?
Okay, thank you. Thank you again. Just to say something on the African visions. Since 2005, the African Union brings policymakers, state heads to discuss about this kind of connectivity in practice. One of the issues is the paperwork are not difficult, but the implementation are very serious and tough. And as an input, the Africa Union have developed the program for infrastructure development for Africa in 2012 and puts about 9 highways as a project, 40 key corridors, 90 ports, and 53 airports, which connecting from east to west to north to south of the continent, which can help IMEC to use this opportunity in Africa, align with the Africa Union visions of those connectivity plans, which supported by finance, by the African Development Bank and other partners who are already engaged in the intra-Africa trade arrangement system infrastructure, which is a very easy way for IMEC to connect Africa, which actually IMEC at first initial excluded Africa. I don't know why, but at the initial time, that means. So, but this is a great opportunity which is designed by the Africa Union, which Belt and Road initiatives or global gateways try to use as an opportunity. Even, so you know, almost all of you, the Africa Union and the EU global gateways have invested half of its budget to the African infrastructure, which is they plan tentatively $300 billion, and they plan to invest it in Africa, which is $150 billion, which mostly the Africa Union and its member countries are appreciative of that initiative. So IMEC should connect this and link these global gateways with European partners and with the African partner, which is the Africa Union and the African Development Bank. And, you know, Africa is building the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement since 2019, which is around 50 countries signed that agreement. And still, it's one of the big EU model of the Africa in history because it connects more than 54 countries in the intra-Africa trade arrangements. And any initiative which is proposed by the IMEC and other connectivity initiative should align with the existing Africa Union initiatives, unless it will be a bottleneck to implement it. Because they have their own priorities, they have their own agenda, and priority in sector even, in maybe road or railway, airports. So aligning and identifying the priorities of the country, which are the sector which is the priority, is very important to the implementation process of the IMEC, which one of that tradesman talks about, why we talk about these issues of Africa and other, because already the initiative is excluding. But integrating is very important because Africa is the future continent of the world, having many resources and minerals. And the Americans even try to have a the Angola corridor on the mineral connectivity, Lepoto corridor, or they have an initiative, Lobito corridor. They have a great initiative which is proposed by the American, connecting 3 countries. And now Trump is dealing with DRC, which is one of the richest country in Africa continent, but have its own internal problems. So sometimes perception management is very critical when it comes to Africa. So the Europe and other collective West should manage the perception towards Africa and cooperate and using the existing potential that Africa should have. That will boost the global cooperation.
Sure. Anybody else? Opportunities around school? Sure. Two quick things. One of them is the sort of technical creativity, and then I guess what you can call maybe the conceptual creativity. On the technical side, to finance it, there's lots of different pools of capital. There's lots of different financial instruments. Beyond the sovereign wealth funds that we talked about, beyond the possible green bonds and so forth, there are trust funds. They do exist. Dozens and dozens of multilateral, multi-donor trust funds exist, for example, within the apparatus of the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, obviously, based in Manila, so on and so forth. Just got to pick a thematic area. When I was working on community development with the World Bank in Indonesia, we had a pool of different donors: Switzerland, Denmark, USAID, and what was it? It was like Finland or something like that, you know, all working on community development, village development, you know. And if you pick a thematic area, you work with existing trust funds, those can really unlock a lot of value over the long term with multi-donor stakeholders. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, how can we not only lower costs, but also drop the amount of time it takes to move goods around the sub-region, for example? I was talking about the long amount of time to move goods from point A to point B within Indonesia and within the sub-region as well. Now, at the World Bank, my colleagues did a network efficiency analysis. What would it take to reduce the time to move goods from Sulawesi Island, which is shaped like a K, and Bitung, which is a port way up there on that top part of the K? How do we get goods from there up to the Northeast Asian countries like China and Philippines and Japan and so on and so forth? If you upgrade those ports to a transshipment hub, and a transshipment hub, of course, collects local points and brings goods there, it will drop the amount of time to move things to Northeast Asia, including our friends at the J end of the IMEC, drop it by 2 days, which is huge. So maybe IMEC is a chance to actually do those things that these studies and white papers and so on and so forth have proposed. And then finally, on the conceptual end, you know, I really think that values are really important. This is not just mumbo jumbo. It's like, what in practice are we actually trying to reflect through, an entire multi-country project like IMEC? Now, Belt and Road, their values are underpinned, very explicitly stated, it's on the website, the community of common destiny, which is a very Orwellian Beijing-style thing where, you know, we're going to recenter Beijing and so on and so forth. But if we look at other values, such as, for example, you know, transparency, AIIB, which is under Beijing, for example, out of all the multilateral development banks, has the lowest amount of transparency in terms of board minutes and, you know, other documentation. If we increase that for IMEC, I think it would benefit everyone. There's other values we can look at too, including quality infrastructure. I was really appreciative of the Japanese infrastructure initiatives, which started off by declaring themselves as the Partnership for Quality Infrastructure in response to the Belt and Road Initiative, and also other values as well, such as just integrity and better cooperation. So if those values are reflected by an IMEC, which is new, it sets new standards and benchmarks, which are really, really important over the long term. And finally, I just ask all the sort of artists in the room or those connected to artists to really sort of, you know, reflect and manifest this particular vision through the arts. The arts do reduce tensions within societies and between societies, and to communicate that, even through something that sounds very hard-nosed and technical, at the international level, will really, really get youth involved, as well as sort of communicate this vision a lot better.
Thank you. I think you asked two questions. One is, sure. So, some big ideas about taking IMEC forward in some ways. I think there are three reasons, in my mind, conceptually speaking, why IMEC is unique and perhaps important. Number one, this is the age of minilateralism. This is the age of like-minded coalitions. In the age of deglobalization and failing multilateralism, you need like-minded countries to come together to uphold global commons, to cater to global commons, to cater to global governance, or regional governance for that matter. So I think regional connectivity is one of those commons, regional and global commons, that must be upheld and pursued by like-minded countries. So I think to that extent, we are filling a major vacuum internationally, conceptually speaking, number one. Number two, I think as more and more economies rise, as more and more countries grow, we need more and more alternative routes. We need more and more alternative arrangements and mechanisms. World is growing, populations are growing. There will be more, markets, travel, people, etc. The future needs more of everything. There is no question about it. So, and trusted networks, like-minded coalitions. I can't sort of underline and emphasize that enough. If there is one value that is important, in a world that is anarchic, in a world that is chaotic, in a world that is unstable, that is that of trust. That's one value I think a lot of countries are going to look for. Like you said, we're not going to trade with China on sensitive technology. Same here. Why is that? It's because we don't trust the Chinese, precisely because of that. So I think trust is going to be one of those factors that will need to be taken seriously. The question that we should therefore ask is there enough trust among the IMEC partners? So let me come to the challenge part of it or the risk part of it. From my country's point of view, from our point of view, I think one of the problems is that clearly India is temperamentally a risk-averse country. This is not a country that is temperamentally risk-averse country. It's not a country that sort of takes strong decisions unless and until it is faced with a crisis. So I think there is that problem. The second one is on the China question too. I don't think the Indians would want to sort of pitch it or see it as an alternative to China. We are next door to China. We are the next door neighbor to China. If China wants to kick somebody, they're going to come after us. I mean, it's not a question of the Indians are scared of the Chinese from morning to evening, but there's a tension in the Indian mind in that sense. I want to sort of make one more point about the question of why this is perhaps a great idea, IMEC in that sense. Somebody said about the instability in the international system. I think from an Indian point of view, instability is not a bad idea. Instability is good in the international system because if there was no instability, nobody would have asked for our opinion, right? I mean, nobody would come to Delhi and ask, what do you think about the international order? Things are fine. The Europeans are handling the international order just fine. We don't need the Indians and the Indonesians and the Filipinos to sort of give us an opinion. Today, we are asked our opinion because there is instability in the international system. That feeds into what you said, which is the sort of innovative coalitions. So instability provides possibility for creativity and creative coming together of like-minded coalitions. So I think there is that possibility too. But back to you.
Richard, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, very quickly, I was actually in Brussels last month and had conversation with folks at the European Commission, European Parliament, among others. I'm not sure people are aware. So EU right now is really gung-ho in finalizing free trade agreement with a couple of countries, and it looks like the Philippines seems to be the most promising one, followed by Indonesia, and Thailand is also in the mix. They wanted that to finalize for quite some time, but there's someone called Duterte who came in and complicated things, but with that guy somewhere else, I think we're going to move. So in that sense, the Philippines is going to be invested in direct trade with Europe. When it comes to the Middle East, just like Indians, we're all over the place, right? You can always find a Filipino. So if you talk to engineers, big companies in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, you're going to find Filipinos there. So we have already that kind of connection there, and we want to double down on that in terms of private-to-private cooperation. But, I think people also forget that next to India, the Philippines is the other business process outsourcing superpower. So in terms of services, tech, and increasingly semiconductors, will be involved. But I think the key thing, and this is the final thing I want to add here, is that, we, Philippines and Southeast Asia and India have to strengthen that relationship because IMEC is really from India to Europe. But what about India and Southeast Asia? And I think that's the weak link that we have to build on. But I think all the momentum is coming in there in terms of multilateralism, geoeconomics, and politics coming together. That's why I felt synchronicity and bring all of these major initiatives to compete with China and provide, more alternatives is almost inevitable. Yeah.
Right. So, Chris, somebody's got to let me know when we got to pull the plug here. But I wanted to bring you in the conversation because among the many reasons why I really hate the term Global South, and I think it totally sucks, is so the Caucasus and Central Asia have many of the same challenges of other parts of the world, but they're not considered part of the Global South, so that we don't talk about them. But as somebody who really follows that part of the region and actually has similar challenges to what we just discussed here, I thought it'd be really interesting to say what is what does the potential of IMEC mean for somebody who is in the middle corridor, which Kosh hates, apparently. He doesn't like that term. But anyway, but for the Caucasus and Central Asia, could maybe you just share a thought?
Thank you, Jim, and also thank you for the invitation to come here. I'm Afghan Nifty with the Caspian Policy Center in Washington, D.C. We deal with the Trans-Caspian corridor primarily. We're trying to emphasize 3 Cs, cooperation, corridors, and connectivity in Central Asia and the Caucasus. It's a major alternative to routes through north. Somebody mentioned today north, middle, and south. When we say north corridor, it's the cargo that goes through Russia primarily, and the south is usually the transit through Iran. So what prompted this connectivity in Trans-Caspian to pick up, for example, last year we have 83% increase in the cargo traffic in Trans-Caspian corridor. It's a multimodal, similar to IMEC. There was a question, what will basically increase the engagement in IMEC? What prompted the Trans-Caspian connectivity to emerge was a big crisis in Ukraine, basically. And then the shippers, the business, started looking for alternatives. And not only that, the Central Asia, big resource of critical minerals that we are discussing now. And all of this resources, energy, and potential of trade is big impetus for Central Asia and the Caucasus. Another big issue in this region is that the countries are also getting connected to each other. We talk a lot about China-Europe trade or India-Europe trade. There is also trade in the region that the region has to get connected with each other. I was just in Samarkand where EU hosted a large summit with Central Asian countries. And I saw that they committed about $13 billion in investing in Trans-Caspian connectivity. And majority of that connectivity is about connecting to countries with itself first before having them connected to with the global powers, basically. And I think instead of waiting on the big issues to be resolved and making them preconditions for further investments in that kind of spaces, it's rather important to try to create the conditions when a very big crisis happens, like what happened in Russia and Ukraine, trade just started flowing because the port investments was made, the road investments have been made, and now it's becoming a viable corridor. So maybe just a small addition to that with some similarities.
Great. Any other questions or hands? Good. You can hand the mic down to Kosh there, somebody. So what's really interesting is, one is the commonality of issues that they're facing in the Caucasus and Central Asia, as it's very similar to the kinds of issues we've been discussing here. But the other is my prediction is in the end, the Caucasus and Central Asia will link most effectively in the global economy through the corridor into the Black Sea, and that most of the future growth and trade with many of the countries here is going to be actually through that corridor. It's not going to be through like north-south trade. Kosh?
Thanks, Jim. One question over to our friend from Ethiopia. 2 points. One, how do you see Ethiopia's connectivity that you mentioned, the Africa Union 2050 vision, all the rest of it, through Somaliland with the MOU to Berbera? And that is the most direct relation and connection of Ethiopia to IMEC. So I would love to hear that from you. The flip side of it is something, I already blabbered too much, but one of the... It's a competition trying to keep up with you. So when people talk about what Africa and IMEC and all the rest of it, it's lost, that was mentioned by you, is that both Saudi Arabia and UAE are one of the biggest and most active growing players in Africa. So by definition, it's already bloody well connected. Whether some think tank hasn't come up with a way to patch this is a different issue, but it's working. So it'd be great to hear from you on that. And love to hear from a Philippine perspective on how we can leverage the Philippines actually being the right geographical country on the north-south axis. So it is literally the country that engages with the Pacific Islands, with Japan, with Australia, and for all the reasons that you mentioned, it's kind of the appropriate anchor for IMEC in the Indo-Pacific, the second most invisible country after the first most invisible country of islands? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I do have a map to show how the connectivity is working, but it's somewhat blurred and I cannot show it to the screen. But the issue of connectivity, from Ethiopian perspective, it is one of the foreign policy priority of the current government. It's a definite, because there is a serious shift on the foreign policy orientation, and including the Prime Minister assumption, philosophy, and his book on what he called Maddamer, is a vision, which is synergy or addition in English. So we have to integrate that's the assumption. So we have a connectivity plan to connect in any ways to the sea. That's a very important thing, is that we are a landlocked country, so IMEC also should consider landlocked countries rather than focusing on coastal states. That's my recommendation. Because, when you think about Africa, particularly the Eastern Africa, you think in mind that Ethiopia, which is the second largest population size and the largest territorially in a very big country, and a huge economy, and 70% use, which it's an issue for migration and for the concern for Europe and other countries. But particularly the issue of connectivity is from Kenya, South Sudan to Addis and Djibouti. There is a huge project which is funded by the African Development Bank and the African Union, the Lamu project, which connecting the Kenya port to the Djibouti corridor through Ethiopia, which is the biggest connectivity project. And in terms of this Saudi, UAE, and especially the GCC countries, as you know, Saudi is one of the biggest Arab countries who have more investment in Ethiopia, and UAE is now following it, especially on artificial intelligence and other economy sector. UAE is very interested and very highly cooperative and have a strong friendly partnership with the existing governments in Ethiopia. Very, very strong in partnership and friendship with UAE and Saudi. Because what was the assumption the Ethiopian government it wants to diversify its partnership rather than concentrating on a single partners. That's why we joined BRICS, with including with Saudi, UAE, Ethiopia, Egypt from Africa. Egypt and Ethiopia joined BRICS because that's the assumption. We need more partners and diversification, not to be suffocated through geopolitical economic competition, or sometimes as an instrument of punishment on foreign policy on as economic instrument. So IMEC should be seen as an alternative for the African continents, as an alternative rather than as a competing. It should be seen as an alternative options, because all African countries need connectivity initiatives, and IMEC should have to see that from that perspective. So UAE, Saudi are very high investing, and India and China is also competing and investing in Ethiopia.
So Richard, 1 minute? You get the last word?
1 minute. I mentioned the Philippines as a linchpin state, precise because it's like the same amount of hours it takes you to be in Tokyo, in Seoul, in Guam, right? And it's exactly in between the first, second, and increasingly the third island chain is also becoming important. So you have this perfect convergence of geoeconomic and geopolitical consideration. There's a reason why the Asian Development Bank was established in the Philippines in the 1960s. But we were like that kid who peaked too early, right? Got overexcited about everything. Oh, we're the new stars. And then we let go of all of the advantages we had. But now, because of the rise of China, all of this uncertainties, it's finally giving us that impetus and push to exercise a degree of strategic agency that I felt our incompetent, kind of Latin American-style politicians didn't bother to do. But thanks to people like us, the new generation of thinkers and civil society folks, we're pushing the government to embrace that, and I'm seeing a lot of positive indications. So whether we want it or not, we are being pushed in the direction of exercising that strategic agency and leveraging that. So we can be the little India on the Pacific side and complement whatever IMEC is offering on the other side of the Indo-Pacific Ocean.
And all right, please join me in thanking the panel. Thank you. Thank you.
At the end of the last panel, our last official part of the conference is going to be Carrie Switte from the Signal Group delivering the closing remarks for the day.
Okay, well, I'll just take one of these. Anyway, the pre-existing mics are always too high for me. So first I want to say, well, we're all old friends now, so we can have a very casual closing. And somebody commented about who's in the room, and Tommy said to me, I'm so happy, Carice, that you're not bent out of shape over the fact that there are so few people left in the room. And I said, I wasn't never interested in a public conference about IMEC. We're going to cut that from the video. I'm interested in you, all of you speakers who are here today, because you matter. The audience is very nice. Maybe there's some people in the audience who stayed and they have a real interest and they want to do things. But from my perspective, this is about doing things. And all the criticism about think tanks, well, stick it in your ear. We are a think tank that makes things happen, and that's why we are so grateful to these partners. First of all, I have to thank Christoph. Christoph, you have been outstanding, A to Z. I have to tell you, one of the most serendipitous moments that I have experienced in recent years was having met the Danube Institute at an event, and then Christoph getting in touch with us and saying, I want to come to your office in Israel and talk to you about doing something together. And I thought, oh my God, what are we going to do with Hungary? And his idea was this, and we were thrilled. So thank you so much, Christoph. Thank you to all of the Danube Institute. A very important shout out to Melinda, who has been fantastic, and to Julia for really doing everything that it ran beautifully, really smoothly. I want to say, well deserved. A point of order. We know who the global, where are you, James? We know the global south includes Central Asia. It also includes Latin America. But that is, there's a limit to how far we're going to go in the very first conference. I also want to say that I was very surprised, Happy Mon, that you said you don't hear about IMEC in India. When Tommy and I were in India March of last year, 2024, every single meeting we had with institutes and government, the first or second topic was IMEC. So I guess we're talking to different people, but it is very much on the minds of those we spoke to. And I want to say that IMEC is, when the G20 announced and they thought of this idea, there was no exclusion. This was an evolution of the Abraham Accords, as I mentioned, and that meant it sort of had an I2U2 foundation, and it went on to go beyond that. And we're here today to say we invite all of you who are interested in Vietnam, in Ethiopia and Africa writ large, in South Korea and Japan and Philippines, all Indonesia, of course. We invite all, and it's not even us inviting, it's just me from Signal Group and Danube saying, we invite all of you into these conversations because you heard today, it's incredibly important. There is so much potential, and there is so much that we can all gain. I really believe in, I talked about the fact that together we all benefit from the collective strength. I don't know if you noticed how Europe dealt with China. It's different maybe right now, but the European Union was an entity, so they could say to China, the individual countries could say, oh, well, the European Union, the boss, says we can't. And they didn't have to take responsibility for the fact that they were, or at least didn't have to take a hit for saying no to China. There is a lot to be gained in this kind of unity. And it was said in this session and earlier that minilaterals are where, this is the order of the day. That horrible two elephants and grass thing. But the truth is, the song, clowns to the left of me, jokers to my right. Okay, we've got U.S. problematic on one side, and China, really challenging on the other side. But we have the rest of the world. We are the rest of the world, and we are a huge population with a tremendous amount of agency and power. All we have to do is work together to harness it. And so today we heard about the power of these corporations. They already know. There's the money that wants to be moved and invested. They already are looking for an IMEC to facilitate. And we also learned today about the importance of branding, the golden road, my new favorite phrase. We have to remember that how people perceive. You talked about perception. It's not just Africa. Everybody makes their decisions based on perception. So branding is important, and narrative is important, we heard. The narrative that this is not about going against anyone. What was that wonderful phrase? I think maybe you said it. Competition without exclusion. That is a wonderful approach, absolutely. We also heard about it's very realistic to expect that we can establish public-private partnerships that are successful. There are examples, and there are ways, and we can do that. And I think that we didn't talk much about the digital connections. This is going to be a very fertile ground for all of us. I think, we all know economic development is infused through advancing technology. And by the way, we all know that great power competition at the heart of it is new and emerging technologies. And there is a lot of tech capability among the IMEC countries and the IMEC-friendly countries who are here today. And working together on that level is going to be very important and significant. We also heard about biology, arteries, veins, capillaries. We need to establish these basic networks, enjoy the flow, as Kaush said, that's already happening, the money that Thomas said is already moving. We need to grab that and just funnel it into the right direction. And I think my last sentence will be, and if you'll all maybe validate this with a nod, I think we can justify having the second annual international conference on IMEC next year. Can I have a vote on that? Yes. Good.